Ladies and gentlemen, we're waiting on getting a quorum. Once we have a quorum established, we'll get the meeting started. One quick update, we will be taking a moment of personal privilege to allow the residents of Gordon Plaza to make a statement. So that will happen before the Lincoln Beach update presentation. You ready, Leslie? All right. Welcome everybody to the Governmental Affairs Committee meeting today. Anita, are you doing the roll call? All right, roll call, please.
Councilmember Morrell,
Here.
Councilmember Jeruso, Councilmember Harris, Councilmember King, Councilmember Green, and let the record reflect that Councilmember Moreno is joining us.
Thank you very much. First up, we have, let's see if our machines are working today, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody log in. All right. First up, we have the approval of minutes from our July 28th meeting. I'll move to, Councilmember Harris moves to approve. Councilmember Green seconds. Please vote your machines.
Good morning, Council.
Wait, one sec, we're still doing roll call right
Okay, I thought you said.
Good. Okay, there you go. All right. 3 yeas, no nays. The minutes are adopted. You can go now, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the privilege. As residents of Gordon Plaza, we are here today at this Governmental Affairs Committee meeting. It's because this is the place where residents are supposed to get a greater understanding of how the council, the administration, and the community work together through various boards and commissions. There is supposed to be transparency and clear communication to move efforts forward on behalf of the people. Well, we are here today to say that this so-called working together is not happening. As a matter of fact, the experience has been more hostile than helpful. Each time it appears that there is forward movement, a wrench gets thrown in that we as residents of Gordon Plaza have to pick up and essentially throw back. At one point, we took seriously the engagement of the Gordon Plaza Task Force meeting because we essentially ran it and it was community driven. Yet, at the point where we ask simple, justifiable questions, we are either met with silence, confusion, or excuses. We say no to all of that. Those so-called task force meetings have been a joke. The task by the city has not been complete. So we are here to bring the force. We are not here to play progress or politics. We are here because our people, our families, and our neighbors are suffering, and we refuse to suffer in silence. So despite the fact that we have asked, and we have written and emailed, we have shown up to these meetings and engaged each and every one of you we will only increase our fight going forward, no matter who sits in what seat going forward, because our lives are at stake. Daniel Rustin said, when an individual is protesting society's refusal to acknowledge our dignity as a human being, our very act of protest confers dignity upon us. We have a responsibility to hold people, both elected and appointed, responsible for doing what they said or what we demand is needed to ensure that we have access to what already belongs to us, to keep us truly safe. Our much needed resources are being blocked from us, and that is a serious problem. Healthy housing is a part of this demand for us, and we will not stop fighting until this is achieved. When we are involved, the process moves much smoother. We're speaking on behalf of our rights to access the funds that we fought so very hard to secure. That is now allocated, approved, and sitting in a bank collecting interest while we return to our homes on top of a landfill. So once again, since some people either do not listen or do not care, we will say the two things that we need right now, and both are simple to communicate. In addition to the scheduling of the next Gordon Plaza Task Force meeting that was supposed to happen weekly, we request number one, the draft escrow agreements for our review and advance finalization for this process. We have been told weeks ago that Carl Butler was drafting those. So show us the drafts so that we can participate in the process and prepare our community accordingly. Number two, the methodology for this distribution process, prioritizing non-devaluation and non-discriminatory practice. Again, we have provided a full expert analysis report, and there is no reason it should not be used. On Friday, August the 12th, we were informed by the city attorney, Ms. Turner, that we would receive a confirmation of the methodology by Monday, August the 15th, to be used to distribute funds to our community members. Today is Wednesday, August the 31st. Now, before I sit down, since we have asked for these same two things since August the 11th, we would like to request a response directly from you, Mr. Green, the council person for District D, on what you plan to do to push forward on behalf of these two simple and immediate requests we have made. And then anyone else who is convicted enough to respond to what has been shared today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for Gordon Plaza residents for staying on this most important issue. I am going to ask sometimes that you have to force the issue by having the meeting, and I am willing to ask the other member of the task force who is on the council who is here, Councilmember Moreno, and I'm sure that Councilmember Thomas will agree that we set the task force meeting and that we request strongly that there be a presentation on those two issues, and it can be as soon as possible. I understand the limitations that we have, but those parties involved with this process who hired the consultants do work for the administration, but also work for the council and work for the public. I'm willing to set this meeting and just say that it's going to happen, make it public, extend invitations to the administration to participate. It can be as soon as possible. If it satisfies the requirements of the law that it take place on, that we could take it on Friday, I'd be willing to do it, or on Monday, which is Labor Day. I know that that's a challenge. So maybe on Friday or on Tuesday. And the purpose of it is to put the pressure on to at least have an update relative to these two issues and other issues. So council member, are you available, or would you be willing to set that task force meeting for either Friday or for Tuesday, just because Labor Day is a holiday?
Yeah, in fact, I had talked to Miss Amar and Ms. Hurst about even doing a special council committee meeting so that we can have a little bit more leverage on getting everybody to the table. But if you want to do a task force meeting, that's fine. I'm happy to do it Friday or Tuesday. You set the time, or residents, you tell me what works. That's what I would like, but I leave it up to you all to decide. Is that what would you all rather have a committee meeting? Okay. What I can do is I can,
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we'd have a quorum. Once you set a
I think
task force meeting, there are 5, so 3 members have to be present for a committee meeting to be official.
Well, I think the only challenge I would put before you is that when you're scheduling the task force meeting, you're managing 3 council member schedules. When you're doing a special committee meeting,
Right.
it will probably take sometime next week to get all the council members to be present on that special committee meeting. So it still would be done relatively quickly. I just want to make y'all aware that once you're dealing with a larger than the task force group, you're looking at 5 council members, then typically we book the chambers and try to get the council members all to commit to certain dates. I don't think it's impossible. I think it's be pretty easy to get next week. But I just want to make sure that the council president will have to work with those schedules to get it done. So I do.
yeah,
It's important to
so-
recognize, yes. But it's
Okay,
important to
so
recognize that a task force, for example, if the other members weren't able to attend, I can attend the task force. If we try to have a committee, we
well,
definitely have to
what
have
I'm
a
saying is
quorum.
I've just checked the schedules of Councilmember Harris and Councilmember Morrell and myself for Tuesday at 1 p.m. They are all on my climate and sustainability committee. So that is a quorum right there. Are you available at 1 o'clock on Tuesday?
Yes,
Okay, and Councilmember Green is also a member of that committee, so now you have 4 members of that committee, so you will have a quorum. So,
well, that's the purpose,
So-
to invite them and to put pressure on to have participation.
yes, so, and the chamber is open, so put on your calendars, 1 o'clock on Tuesday. Okay,
Before we go to our next presentation, I know Mr. Perkins was here yesterday, Jesse, and I want to again apologize on behalf of the council. What happened during Public Works with that NOPD response was beyond just, it was absolutely unjustified and uncalled for, and it was embarrassing because we, as the council president spoke, we have an NOPD officer who's back there. You guys all know him, who is our security for the chambers. And the fact that no one bothered to call the person embedded in chambers to confirm whether or not this crazy riot thing was handling, and that aggressive, overly aggressive and unnecessary NOPD response where dozens, if not 100 officers were pulled off the street for a fake event, that was terribly disrespectful to the residents of Gordon Plaza. It was discouraging, and we are going to make sure it doesn't happen again. But I want to, once again, I know many of you weren't here when Jesse was here the other day, but I want to apologize to y'all on behalf of the council. That should not have happened and will not happen again. You're very welcome. So Tuesday it is then.
hang on, one more thing too. I see Mr. Threat here and Ms. Robles. Can you all be here on Tuesday at 1 o'clock? Mr. Threat is shaking his head, yes. Ms. Robles, yes, and Ms. Robles will be here as well. Okay.
All right. I think to put the exclamation point on that request, what I can do is work with the council president to send a official communication, a letter in advance, letting the administration know and our partners know what the expectation is and what information should be provided on that date. So there will be no excuse that someone didn't know what they were looking for. We will send that. I'm a big fan of paper trails, so we'll make sure that's sent. We'll try and get it done today, okay? We will take a look at that and we'll get on it. But thank y'all for being here today. Next up, we have the Lincoln Beach presentation. So we'll get to that. Thank you. And we will copy and paste it. I'm a fan of that too, when I can avoid some extra work. Thank you.
And just so y'all know, I'm emailing Miss Amar right now and the other people CC'd in the email that she and I have been on so that she can send the information along to everybody as well. Great.
And I will also confirm that following this meeting, I will personally go to the city attorney's office and at least be able to speak to her directly or to put in writing that we are asking for this information to give even more advance notice. Okay. I do want to say one thing. I just want to make it clear because there's some kind of suggestions or innuendo out there. I don't know who would have called 911 to say that there was a riot, but I will tell you that I think that a little bit more research would show that it came from a party that we didn't expect would do such a thing. It was just to create. Well, the problem is, well, let me tell you, very honestly, it happened while the meeting was going on and no one left here
Okay.
on that day.
Yeah, okay. Everyone,
I understand. I wanna make that clear.
everyone, we need to get to the items on the agenda.
Yes.
I promise you that we will have a public airing and investigation to find out who that person was. So we're gonna work on that.
Right.
Thank you. Mr. Threat.
Good morning, President Moreno, Vice President Morrell, Councilmember Green, Councilmember Harris. Thanks for allowing us to give you the public update on Lincoln Beach. You know, just from history, it's been a long time since we addressed that piece of property in the Lincoln Beach parcel to bring it back to life. We've got Sharon Robles is with me here this morning. My name's Joseph Thread. I'm Deputy CEO for Infrastructure. And it was the mayor's priority to restore Lincoln Beach. I think that we have movement in that direction. We have several sources of funding. And without ado, I'd like to get Ms. Robles to start our presentation, and then we'll take questions from yourself and the public as required. Thank you. Ms. Robles.
Good morning. I'm Sharon Robles. I'm the Acting Chief of Staff for the Department of Public Works, and I'm managing the Lincoln Beach project, the redevelopment project. Just as a quick background, Lincoln Beach has been closed since the 1960s, and a lot of the infrastructure that's currently in place has fallen into disrepair. In the spring of 2021, the Control administration, we completed a site assessment, which would help us determine whether or not Lincoln Beach could feasibly be reopened to the public to be used as a passive recreational park. And the results of the site assessment confirmed that, yes, that is possible. So after the site assessment was completed in the spring of 2021, the administration did allocate $5 million in bond funds to reopen Lincoln Beach. Those funds, the way the budget works, they actually became available in December of 2021. So I'm going to go through each of the possible scenarios. This is a quick budget screen explaining like what the different opening scenarios could be. We had a quick open idea, minimum improvements, moderate improvements, and extensive improvements. So quick version of minimum improvements, it would be the parking lot on the protected side of Hayden Boulevard, adding crosswalks and allowing access to Lincoln Beach, which is behind a 16-foot flood wall and railroads. And it would be accessible through the tunnel that was built in the 1930s, and it would be retrofitted to allow for safe passage. The original cost estimate would be like about 8.3 to almost $11 million for the minimum improvements. The moderate improvements would have a larger parking lot, which is one of the questions that actually previous council members had asked for, that we have at least 2 acres of parking. Some of the nearby residents expressed an interest and or concern that they didn't want to have a bunch of people parking in their neighborhood. So to increase the parking lot size, it ends up being about 100 spaces for about $1 million, $700,000. So we did increase that. And then it would include a crossing over the railroad tracks from the protected side. Here's another image showing kind of what that would look like. The estimate for the moderate improvements is about $12 million to $15 million. And then this is a conceptual image of the extensive improvements, which would be going from the parking lot on the protected side of the flood wall, having like a stairs and elevator to get all the way across the flood wall, the railroad tracks, and excluding the tunnel. You wouldn't have to go through the tunnel, but the tunnel would be like a second access point. Interestingly enough, this scenario is actually a little cheaper than the moderate one. And the reason for that is because when you're going to the extensive, because you'd be able to, for example, get the utilities over as you're building the bridge, you get some of the economy of scale. And so if you had one big chunk of money, you could build the project cheaper. And that's where the funding comes in. So we already have $5 million in bond money that's set aside. Some of the criteria that is necessary to access that money is that whatever improvements happen, they have to last longer than 10 years. So for example, cleanup, any sort of elements that would be involved for a quick cleanup would not be eligible. We also just this last week, the CEA from the state for $500,000 in state capital outlay funds was allocated to us. And that's going through the final contract is being routed now as we speak. I got a copy of it, I think yesterday or the day before. We also did apply for a grant, a reimbursable grant from the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation. That's an EPA grant for $40,000. That's going to fund design of the parking lot, which would be permeable. And then one of the main things that you had asked in advance of this meeting was asking about the multi-year plan. So just to give some quick background, Deepwater Horizon, the BP money, New Orleans was allocated about $8.4 million plus interest. And so the idea is that over 30 years, the parish will get $8.4 million from the BP oil spill to use, but that money is deposited into the account incrementally. So at this moment, we would be able to access about $4.3 million. That's what the multi-year plan covers. The city did go over a bunch of different possible scenarios of how we would use that funding. Right now, what we would need to get access to that funding is actually supplying the preliminary design documents. And so there's amendment routing right now to have like design of some of the like to retrofit the tunnel, to fix the exterior brick wall, to correct any sort of problems that are happening right now with the shelters that are currently in place. Those design documents will be used as part of the application to draw down the $4.3 million that's currently available.
So are the design is the design complete? Are the documents done?
No, the contract for the design documents is currently routing. A normal city contract takes between 45 and 60 days. The last part of that is I have to send one more thing to the law department and then it's routing, but it's already gone through most of the process. Like the CRMC committee, which reviews contract and task orders amendments, they approved it last week. And so that's routing now.
So you have to, sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding right. So you're RFPing it out, you'll hire a firm, they'll do the design?
No. We already have a designer, the same designer who did the site assessment. They're going to do the construction documents for this. And so it's just an amendment to their existing contract.
I got it.
And so that's already, the duration of the contract has already been extended. Now we have to do an additional amendment to actually line item out what the specific construction documents are going to be. So like, for example, like they're going to need to prepare 30% design documents to show how we would fix the exterior wall, how we would fix the tunnel. One of the biggest challenges that we're going to have is actually reestablishing the utilities, because we can't open unless we have a restroom, for example. Right now we have a 16-foot flood wall that goes down about 32 feet. And so how we get through the flood wall to get the sewage treatment is going to be a challenge, whether we build something on the flood side or whether we have an opening in the flood wall to get to the other side to have it treated and then transported back. I mean, that's some of the engineering challenges.
So how long do you think it's going to take to finish this whole design phase?
So the design for the quick start, the contract allows them to have a year. I don't think it'll take that long. We'll start like with other elements of it. For example, the master plan. So these things can happen simultaneously. There's like the quick start opening plan, and those documents will be used to get additional funding. Like, for example, and I'll get to that in a minute, the State Historic Preservation Office, there's a former Tulane archaeology student who submitted an application on behalf of the city to have Lincoln Beach added to the historic register. And so that process has like started with a class like a year and a half ago. And very shortly, she'll be presenting her case to the State Historic Preservation Office. if that committee votes to place Lincoln Beach on the historic register, which it seems likely to be included, like very likely, that would also open up the city to additional funding resources. So like, know that money's not in the bank, but like the reason I have here Save America's Treasures grant is because they can offer you between $15,000 and $500,000 of additional funding if you're preserving historic places like Lincoln Beach. So.
And President Moreno, we do still have the Go Mesa funds in the bank account. That's $29 million. We had to submit 5 projects, one of them like Riverbank, the levee stabilization program, but it's other monies that are not in design right now. I'm gonna contact the state and see if it's a possibility we can submit Lincoln Beach for some of those dollars, but that money's in the bank right now.
There's also, we think that, so we know for sure we can get the BP money, that's 4.3 million. We also expect when we are listed on as a state historic site that we'd be eligible for a land and water conservation fund, which would be another $2 million. So there's a bunch of other possibilities in terms of funding. It's just a matter of putting it all together. This was one of the questions that was asked previously. So the multi-year plan, for us to be able to have access to the BP funds, we have to submit a plan. And so the city went through an exercise to talk about a bunch of different possible ways we could use that funding. Ultimately, we decided Lincoln Beach would be the best use of that money. And so that's what we're proposing. The plan was approved in March of 2020. And last year, when we were asking for feedback from residents, that's what we were asking the feedback for. So it would support us applying, or it would support us putting in the request to use the funds in this way. I know it's kind of hard to read, but these are some of the other projects that we did consider in addition to Lincoln Beach, like some other like resilient New Orleans plans, some other hazard mitigations, and ultimately Lincoln Beach was decided because it would have the greatest impact, both economically and also New Orleans East was in greatest need of the investment. Some other considerations, our original estimates for Lincoln Beach, these were put together in 2021 using information previously. What we have seen in infrastructure throughout the city is that like our bids right now in public works are coming in between 40 and 100% higher than our original estimates. So I would anticipate as we're getting through, like as the engineer is putting together the design documents for us to access the BP funds, I would expect some of our original estimates to increase. Hopefully it won't be 40 to 100%, but I would anticipate that. And one of the elements that they do have in their contract is to put out the RFQ, and that will go out before the end of the year. That's going to be the primary mechanism that we have for public input. And also, I'm sure Ms. Tris will let you know that they actually did the New Orleans for Lincoln Beach, they actually did apply for a grant. And so they have a couple community meetings coming up in September to get some additional feedback. And it's information that we can definitely incorporate to the master plan to hopefully accelerate that process a little. These are the specific elements that are going to have to go to 30% design so that we can access the BP money. This is, for example, figuring out how we're going to tie into the water system, the drainage system. We're going to have to do some demolition of some of the existing structures. I want to make sure you also understand that the permitting process, there's a variety of permits that are required for us to move this project forward. And there's a number of different entities that each have jurisdiction. So while we did provide the railroad, the Army Corps of Engineers, the levee board, our copies of the site assessment so they could give us some preliminary feedback, we still have to go through like the formal permitting process for that. I just mentioned the community workshops, which got funding for through a grant, and those are in September. They did ask the administration to come, and so we are planning to be there. Also, the Quick Start Amendment is already routing now. It should be done very shortly, and they'll start in the fall. I spoke to Mia Kaplan, who is the student who supplied or who submitted the application to State Historic Preservation Office. We finalized up that application yesterday, and so we're hoping that she'll be presenting in the fall. We will be there to help support her and extend our support for that, because I'm actually really surprised that had never happened before, and I'm really glad that she took that on even after her class was finished. The master plan request for qualifications should be out later this year, and then we hope to have preliminary design submitted in the spring, permit applications to follow immediately after that, and then go to bid in September or the summer of next year. And I'm looking at the sheet of questions that you had asked, Councilman Morrell. You asked who is managing the project in DPW. That's me. Are there any existing contracts for maintenance or other work related to this project? There is the design contract. We're also routing right now a contract to repair the fence for the parking lot. That's routing right now. That was an informal bid. There are no other funds, like operating funds or maintenance funds currently allocated to Lincoln Beach. I kind of went over the scope and we went over the finances, but I know those were some of the other questions you had asked.
You know, and Councilmember Moreno, there will be opportunities in that second tranche of bond sale that will probably approach at the end of 2023 for additional funds for this project. Sharon Robles, now in DPW, she's going to be moving to Office of Resilience, but long-term, this is going to be her project moving forward, but she'll have the support of the Resilience Office with all those different elements to move forward, move this project forward.
I've got a couple of questions. The first is it typical that the city outsources an historic designation application to a student?
No, we didn't outsource it. She was an architecture student at Tulane and realized that no one had ever submitted an application for that, not the city, not any sort of private organization. She took it upon herself to do that.
Is there a similar designation for Pontchartrain Beach currently?
I don't know. I don't manage that project.
Mhm.
Check on that. I mean, obviously, I support individuals pursuing their passion and education. I just think it's interesting that the city, not just this administration, but previous ones, no one had ever pursued this. And though I'm certainly hopeful that this designation is reached due to her efforts, it is a bit troubling that the city never took it upon itself to do this. And like I said, not just this administration, previous administrations
Right.
have not ever actually done this.
Well, I'll also point out that we're actually the only administration that's actually allocated funds to restoring Lincoln Beach. No one else has done that. There's been other plans in the past or conceptual images with different developers who are interested in like building condos along Lincoln Beach, but the Control administration actually put the money in the bank to make it happen.
One thing I did not notice in your report is what is the community engagement look like for Lincoln Beach?
So there is like, I can't remember exactly when, but the mayor did put together a community advisory committee. And so Ms. Like they're right here behind me.
Okay.
We put together, there was a community advisory put together. It has 7 different members that sit on that committee. Yvonne Martin from neighborhood engagement, she sits on the committee, and then like multiple different council people get to place people on that committee, but it's a total of 7 people. They set their own agenda. We simply support them. I'm invited to every single meeting, but I don't run that meeting. Actually, Ms. Trish sent this morning for the rest of the year, all of the meeting dates at like 7 in the morning for the rest of the year. That's one of the primary ways there's going to be community engagement on this project. We also, even if it's not like a proper committee, we do have like just check-in calls. The Friends for Lincoln Beach and Dawn Aber is one of the main people that's putting together a cleanup at Lincoln Beach. And that's a privately organized cleanup of Lincoln Beach where all the volunteers are being secured by Dawn and Miss Bliss, Miss Trisha and Sage. And they'll have waivers to go in. It's a one-day thing where we're opening the floodgate, cleaning, and then closing the floodgate immediately after.
Speaking of cleanup, we heard during our last meeting that individuals like Reggie and Sage are regularly doing cleanup and they're having trouble getting the debris that they're actually packaging and putting in trash bags picked up. Can you address that issue?
Yes, Lincoln Beach is not open. It's not a safe place to be right now. I wish Mr. King was here right now. So like as an example, on Merlin Vespasian, there's a bunch of dumped couches and debris that's there. And part of the debris that's in place is actually obstructing some of the public roadways. And so that limits EMS and fire and traffic. So in terms of priorities of how we should be addressing dumping issues, illegal dumping, I would say that's more important for us to be addressing it on roads that are open that allow EMS and fire to get to and from people. Lincoln Beach is not open at this time. And so we're only doing this cleanup like as a special request. This is not something we're going to do on a regular basis.
So your response is when they have individuals who see a dilapidated property, who take it upon themselves to actually pick up the trash and bag it. It is not a priority to the city of New Orleans that once the trash has already been picked up and bagged, to actually just send a truck to get the trash.
No,
can't- you
that's a
can't get a
part,
truck.
it's something we can do.
Well, that's why I'm asking the
Right.
question.
You can't get a truck there right now because
Right.
it's like you can't get a dump truck there. The tunnel is a historic tunnel. You don't have the space to do it. You can do like like a golf cart, a little small
Mhm.
truck. You can't get a dump truck back there.
Let us work on that,
I think,
Councilman.
I think you'll have some individuals who will give public comment to the contrary, but I do think
Mhm.
what I am hearing is I appreciate that there is an advisory committee. I appreciate that there has been an effort to try and get the community involved. I do think that based upon the disconnect between the individuals I'm speaking to and what was presented today, as far as communication and what's going on at Lincoln Beach, that needs to be rectified. I think that I hear what you're saying as far as prioritizing clearing roads, for example, but we constantly have complaints across the city on public, private, and other property about dumping and trash. And I think it's very discouraging for people who take it upon themselves to do the work we can't do, honestly, because we don't have the staff or the capacity to go on sites like Lincoln Beach and provide the resources to do that pickup. If they're bagging the trash, and honestly, and like I said, I think Reggie or Sage might want to come up and have some more conversation on that in public comment, but there needs to be more communication on where's the proper site to put the trash for pickup if that's the concern. If the concern is the trash needs to be at X spot, not Y spot, why isn't that being clearly received and articulated to avoid the confusion versus piling up 100, 1,000 trash bags of cleanup, and then after that work's done, figure out a way not to pick it up.
Right, and I think, Mr. Vice President, all I need to know about it. If I can know about it and there's some coordination, I'm sure that we've got a way and a will to go out there and support that effort.
Okay. Well, I know we have some public. I don't have any other questions. Anyone have any questions? Sorry.
Mhm.
So as we work to get this project done, across the street from Lincoln Beach, across from Hain, it's my understanding that the city owns that land.
There's about, 10 acres of a parking. Well, yeah, there's 10 acres that we own on the other side.
Okay, the times that I've been out to Lincoln Beach, whether it's been for a cleanup or to meet with folks there on the different community meetings and one of the locations there across the street. Every time I've been out there, I mean, I'm telling you, like those lots are so overgrown. I mean, the roughage is taller than me. What is the city doing to make sure that we're talking about the residents are going out there to do specific cleanups. What are we going to do about cleaning up our own property that is completely overgrown and, people are throwing God knows what behind there. So what's the plan there?
We've got some movement right now, President Moreno. We've just got 10 new lawn mowers with Parks and Parkways.
You don't need more than a lawnmower for some of these sites.
No, they're huge. These are huge
Okay.
rotary construction mowers. So we just got those in this week. I mean, for us, with all the departments I've got right now, I've got a real problem with equipment.
Mhm.
Most of our equipment is down in EMD, a large part of it. When you talk about tow trucks, dump trucks, the supply and demand right now is real. I mean, for EMD, our repair facility to get parts in is long delays. So we've got a backlog just to get dump trucks and all our equipment out to the sites right now, and staffing, the higher staffing. We just put through all our requisitions for hiring new staff, laborers, truck drivers, whatever. And I think that you'll see most of those lawns cut soon. We're working in that direction right now.
And then, so that's the cleanup and securing of that site, but, Sharon, maybe the question is better for you. Is there any type of movement as to what could possibly happen with this land?
Yeah, well, a portion of it will definitely be used for the parking lot. We've also we've gotten some feedback from the residents previously, and I know there are some entities that are interested in actually opening a drive-in movie theater in part of the parking lot. There's also been interest from the residents in starting like a farmer's market, but the leases for the like, for example, the lease for the drive-in movie theater, until we know exactly like how we're going to cross Hain Boulevard, we can't really negotiate that yet because we don't know, like it's this, there's a portion of the property, we don't know if we're going like straight across or diagonal across, and depending on where the other side of the bridge goes, that'll depend on what part we can actually sell or lease. But that's like one of the possible uses that I've been told of.
And so as you talk about the neighborhood engagement that you mentioned to Council Vice President Morrell and the meetings that'll take place, I'm assuming that what happens across the street will also be part of these discussions with the community?
Yes,
moving
and that's
forward?
actually even part of the application to put the site on the historic register. That the parking lot is also part of that application.
And then,
Or what was the parking lot?
and I know that this is kind of, not as big of a matter, but it is important to members of the community, the signage, the historic sign. What can we do to make sure that it's not damaged even further? I mean, we're still in the middle of hurricane season. It is a sign that's historic. It means a lot to the community. What can we do to do what we can to protect what's left of that sign and then move forward with restoring it?
I think we need to remove it from the site. We need to figure out exactly the best way to do that. Actually, yesterday when I was talking to the architect student who did the application, I believe that we found the original manufacturer of the sign, and so I need to check to see if they are still in business and if they can help us restore it.
Any particular timeline you have to try to figure out the pieces on at least dealing with the sign?
I guess in the next month I can provide an update on what.
Yeah, we've got some unrestricted funds through state capital outlay. That $500,000 is not earmarked for design or planning or anything. That's probably
And that would
one good place to start.
Okay, thank you.
Card-wise, first up, we have Ms. Donna Abear with Eastern New Orleans Neighborhood Advisory Commission. I would ask Sage Bliss and Reggie to figure out which one of y'all wants to come up after Dawn. Okay, well, they haven't filled out a card yet, so why don't you come down, so we can figure out who's gonna fill out a card.
My name is Dawn Abear. I'm the president of the East New Orleans Neighborhood Advisory Commission. And I'm just going to say I came on, I met these great people a little late, so I'm trying to work with them to get Lincoln Beach up and running because it's very important for the entire city. And I must say that I hope Lincoln Beach starts moving before the Pontchartrain Beach project. And I want to say I came in like a couple of months ago. I want to help them to clean up the area. So I'm trying to work with them on that. And I got to admit, I did my due diligence and went and viewed it up close and personal Saturday. And I've got to say, for it to be city-owned property, I was appalled at the amount of bags that are still sitting there in at least 3 different locations that have not been removed by the city. So in working with this, this cleanup activity, and I don't want to assume, but I am going to kind of assume that we have to rent the machinery, the bobcats, to move the bags to the front, because I've been told that the truck cannot drive through the tunnel to the different locations. So that will cost money. So I really would like to know if some of this $500,000 could be used toward that effort. So I want to say this is very important to us. I'm hoping this timeline that was provided is kind of moved up, because just from dealing with other things, it takes a whole lot of time for RSFPs and, for plans to be moved. So if they could get moved a little before 2023, I think that would be fantastic. Because this group right here, they have everything in place. They are adamant about bringing Lincoln Beach back to the public. Just a simple beach is beautiful, and it's something that should be enjoyed by everyone. But I want to thank you for calling this meeting together, and the project manager and her group to get this thing going. So thank you very much, and I'll look forward to going on the beach one day. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Abear. As we get Sage is coming up. I do want to comment on something she said, which I think is very important, which is that it's very frustrating for residents. And Sage, you'll come with your card, but it's very frustrating for residents to be this personally involved in trying to bring back Lincoln Beach, and there being zero personal investment in bringing Pontchartrain Beach back, other than the last minute movement of private philanthropy working with the Lakefront Management Asset Group. It's very frustrating for people to work on this and see that project move much quicker. And I've already explained that kind of the nature of contracting between the city and the state is very different. But I think when you hear that frustration, that is a real frustration, especially considering historically, the difference historically between how Pontchartrain Beach was run and how Lincoln Beach was run, and the fact that Lincoln Beach really exists because there were residents of New Orleans who weren't allowed to go to Pontchartrain Beach. So I know you have your cards ready. Please speak whenever you're ready.
Yeah, if I could, Vice President, I'll personally go out there. I mean, it's first I'm hearing about the trash and everything else, but now I've got the capacity to bring, all the elements of the departments out there to support these agencies. I just need to know about it. So me and my chief of staff will go out there sometime next week and take a look at what we got. If we can assist the residents on cleanup efforts, we'll do that.
Thank you, Reggie, Sage, Bliss, whenever y'all are ready.
Thank you, Council, for having us. We have Trisha Wallace speak first.
Okay, hi, my name is Trisha Wallace. I am the president of the Lincoln Beach Community Advisory Committee and also New Orleans for Lincoln Beach. First, I would just like to clear up with the Lincoln Beach Community Advisory Committee, who's on it. The mayor appointed 2 people and District E councilwoman at the time was Cindy Wynn appointed 2 people, and New Orleans for Lincoln Beach, those are 3 people. So it's not a bunch of council members, it's just the District E council person. So those members are myself, Nicole Adams, Ali Foray, who's the president of the Little Woods Neighborhood Association, Yvonne Martin, Bernard Glapion, and Henry Coxum. We have a meeting coming up. It's a Zoom call September 14th at 6 p.m. And we do have the 2 cleanup community design workshop September 22nd at 6 p.m. It's a Thursday, and September 24th at 8 a.m. Those will be across the street from Lincoln Beach at the Lincoln Beach Welcome Center. That's pretty much all I have at the moment.
All right. You was dead on when you were saying about the historical status of it and a student doing it, and they've been working on it, I guess, about 2 years. I don't know what's taking that so long, but I'll just say this: with the 10 acres of land across the street, because it's one property divided by one street, which is Haynes. I would ask that the 10 acres stay intact and never be sold off. And before they get any plans to build a drive-through movie theater or whatever, have a full project in place and make sure we use every available acreage of that property, especially with 4 years from now, the Joe Biden money coming down. Y'all be able to attract more money and build even a more extensive upgrade at Lincoln Beach. So I would ask and put this on record. It's not even my voice, it's the community voice, that none of that property ever be sold off, the 10 acres, because 2 acres for parking is, at the end of the day, you just got to have a full scale before you even talk like that. And none of it should be leased or sold off.
And I just want to say that these 2 workshops that we're having coming up are really to get everybody on the same page. There's been a lot of different efforts going on, and I think the transparency that we are requesting, I just decided to get ahead of that, and LSU gave us a grant for $5,000 to go ahead, and Sage Michael is matching that 5. He has grant funding from yes, so
but I want Reggie to finish this point. Oh yeah. As far as the cleanup efforts, I'm glad they coordinating together to do the cleanup on September, what?
Before the end of September.
Before the end of
Not
September.
Quite advertising the date because
Okay, and
we didn't want a lot of people to show up. I'm sorry, we didn't want to advertise the date because we're not trying to get a lot of people to show up at this cleanup. We are just, it's an act of good faith, really.
okay, and that's cool that y'all doing that, and I hope it goes as efficient as possible. But getting 2,000 bags off of Lincoln Beach is a walk in the park. This the easy stuff. I wish I wasn't up here even talking about this. The most important thing is design phase and figuring out those utilities. If you want to run them above ground on that ramp that's going to connect the parking lot, overhangs to Lincoln Beach property that's connected to the lake. That's the engineering that's going to be fun for somebody to figure out. The bags and stuff, it's been done already. She understands exactly the way it get done, how much it costs and everything. I know how to do it. I know how to personally do it, but I'm not spending my money no more. I'm kind of tapped out right now. But that's the small potatoes. The big thing is this design phase. It's taking too long. Like, if y'all get it done, we could get moving. Y'all got the money. I just hope y'all feel more enthusiastic about doing it and using all y'all intellectual powers to get it done. We're not trying to be against y'all. We with the community. We with y'all. We just trying to make something great for our city.
Sage.
Yeah, thank you. I just have some prepared comments from the presentation. One, my question is, will the outcome of the charrettes that we design and will be integrated into the future master plan? I heard that was referenced. It will be. I just would want to make sure that we know that it's been a lot of delay in that. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And that's why New Orleans Lincoln Beach is moving ahead with that. Once again, I say we have matching funds to create a legitimate plan with engineers on board, with people who have done projects in the past before, and we have some forward support of people to move this forward. Once again, we talk about the quick start element. Can permitting the construction of the entrance begin with the proposal submitted by the project manager? Project manager has already submitted some type of proposal in the past that added up to like $13-15 million. From that point, that proposal was already received. I see that permitting should have been happened at that point. Once we have $5 million and $500,000 accessible, I don't know what the delay on those permits or those projects to make that entrance happen. Debris removal, we talked about that already. In parking lot phase 1 need to begin as soon as possible. I advocated against that, having that done for a long time. Tulane has a lot next door. Tulane brought their lot up the code. Reggie already spoke. Do not sell any land, and let's get this thing started. Thank you, Councilman Helena, for coming by in the past and seeing our plight. We talked about that lot just being up the code and possibly have an open market over there. Just something low-hanging fruit we could give the community, something on that Haynes corridor we're trying to develop. We talked about the historical listing. Mia Kaplan is a volunteer. She has not been paid a dime from this assessment. She was excited and inspired by Reggie Ford, contacted Reggie Ford on Instagram, said, what can I do with the project? I'm a student. I'm going to volunteer my services to Lincoln Beach Project because she's inspired by the work community members do, and she's not being compensated. Can she be compensated so she can complete that application? As well as Troy Carter's office, we're in contact with Troy Carter's office to make sure we have National Park Service Registry. Once the application with the local is applied, they'll coordinate to register for the National Park Register, and that opens up all kind of resources. So we just request that the master plan request for qualification be expedited. And when it was said that informal feedback from project partners has been received and will be incorporated into the master plan, I just need to know who are those informal project partners they spoke with to fabricate their request for proposal qualification. We weren't consulted. I think that we are project partners and we should be consulting on any request for qualification proposed in the project. I want to ensure that Trisha Wallace right here and the Lincoln Beach Community Advisory Committee input is needed. Those members appointed by those people, the mayor, the councilwoman, that they support her in all efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sage.
I'm about to wrap up. Just a minute. The list of project part of consultant for the master plan RFQ. I would like to have communication be better. This was listed on Sharon Robles' LinkedIn account. I don't have a LinkedIn account, but she let it be known that a RFP to develop a master plan for Lincoln Beach is being put out real soon. I don't know if that's public communications or not, but I don't have a LinkedIn account. But I subscribe to the city website. If that information could be known to the public, not on LinkedIn account, I appreciate that. entrance permitting prior to us now, debris removal contract now, entrance construction contract now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sage. We have two other comments, but before y'all leave, I do think that I will work with Councilmember Moreno, Councilmember Thomas, as well as the rest of the council to really kind of make sure we're facilitating communication in a way that everyone's on the same page. I do think that I appreciate y'all giving us a little background on Mia, and I do think it's appropriate. Obviously, we're grateful for the work she's doing, but the fact she's doing it uncompensated, that level of work is, we should address that. I will say that this has been a passion project for a long time. I do acknowledge and accept, I'm very appreciative that the Cantrell administration is the first one to set aside money for it. Well, we just need to make sure that we're all on the same page, we're all pulling in the same direction, because that is imperative to getting this done timely and it being a project that we can all be proud of. So we'll make sure we stay in the middle of this to make sure communication is being facilitated appropriately. I agree with you, Mr. Threat. I know you have experience with multiple stage projects, and I think that we can definitely address some of the issues like the parking lot and other pieces while dealing with the larger engineering issues, because I'm very familiar, more so than I ever would have wanted to be, regarding the trouble with the Corps of Engineers and the like, with how you run utilities around a flood wall and how you have to go over, and they do not like under.
Yeah.
They do not like under ever. So that might be, we might have to look at this thing and pick it apart and see which things are things we can achieve now and which things are going to be a more long-term, because I do think that your estimates on the engineering are rather optimistic as far as how you're going to run the electricity and possibly the sewer. And I think that that's going to be probably a longer term problem, but I do think there's some other things that we can achieve in the interim so that we can get Lincoln Beach to a good place sooner rather than later. So thank everybody for being here today. We have two more comments and then we have another item on the agenda.
Yeah, if I could.
Thank you all.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Green would like to speak.
No, I'll wait till the public comment.
Okay, first we have Ms. Green, you want to speak? And then after Ms. Green, we have Mr. Morgan. And after that, Councilmember Green would like to speak.
Hello all, my name is Riddell Green and I'm speaking in support of Lincoln Beach. I found out about Lincoln Beach through Reggie's page and then I told my mother about it. My mom wanted to go out and clean up. It was initially her, but after she couldn't climb the wall anymore, my sister and I took that responsibility upon ourselves. So what we do, we climb this wall and it's not that comfortable. My sister jammed her finger and she still continues to go out there to support this movement, because it's not just about us. It's about our ancestors. It's about the people that come after us when we're gone. So I say stand with Lincoln Beach, and I appreciate Reg and Sage and everyone that's a part of this bliss and all the ancestors behind us and before us. So if you guys would just push this forward, this would take our children to another level. If we can do the Rusty Rainbow for the French Quarter, why can't we get a walkway over from Haynes to the other side? We need to make sure that we're being equal and we're pushing everybody else's projects forward. Let's push ours forward. You say that our problem is our youth. Well, let's help our youth. We can create employment with this beach coming back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Mr. Morgan? And after Mr. Morgan, Councilmember Green.
Good morning to everybody in the house. I would like to know, I am the product of the old generation that has went to Lincoln Beach as a kid and grew up going to Lincoln Beach. And there was a great, great difference in Lincoln Beach and Pontchartrain Beach. Pontchartrain Beach was given the best, the state of the art. And how I know it, we had white friends that live across the street from us that would come in the yard and discuss the activity and the difference between our beach that I assessed it, what they was telling us, that they had the state of the art. What I'm saying, do not cheat these people when the time comes to give them what is needed to make it work. and what is needed to make it work, give them the security that they are going to need. And also give them the state of the art that the system, the city has given Pontchartrain Beach, give it to Lincoln Beach because it's their time. Lincoln Beach, Pontchartrain Beach had the time, now is our time, and we are long overdue of it.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Councilman Green.
I just had a brief comment, and I do regret that I was in the back for a little while, but I just wanted to emphasize the crosswalk portion of it, just like we have at Crescent Park. There's a lot more traffic on Hain Boulevard now than there was in the 1950s and 60s when it was easy to walk across the street. And I just want to be a strong proponent of that. We have it at Crescent Park so that people don't have to walk across a railroad track, for example, but this is much more traffic than a railroad is going to create. And I just hope that that's part of it. And look, if it was brought up while I was in the back, I just want to make sure it's on the record that I'm asking that we give proper consideration to having that crosswalk, the same type, which has an elevator for those who can't traverse the stairs and stairs, that'd be a priority, in fact, because of the traffic on Hain Boulevard.
That's one of the possibilities. We're also looking at doing a road diet, which is like thinning out the traffic all the way from Paris to Bullard, which would help with some of the like the racing, the drag racing that's also happening there. So this would take into account, like the plans Lincoln Beach would take that into account to try to make it safer for the whole entire stretch. It wouldn't just be for the benefit directly in front of Lincoln Beach.
You mean traffic lights?
Yeah, it's a
Okay, that's
it's
fine.
like a traffic signal and beacons, a bike lane, and then more narrow roadway so that people would slow down so that it's safer not only to cross the street, but it's just safer in general. There's also, we did add a crime camera over there, and there is like drag racing happening. So that's one of the things that we're hoping to accomplish. We've already engaged NOPD to help with that.
Okay, and I'd like to just also thank the members of the community, the Community Advisory Committee, but it started a long time before then. This is an example of what citizens can accomplish by just taking initiative on. That beach sat for decades. I also know, because I was a member of the lakefront of the Orleans levy district some time ago, that there was even confusion as to whether or not the city owned it. But the bottom line is that citizens stepped up, and it's such a historic place. I'm a friend of the McNeil family, and there's a pool there that was named after a former enslaved person who, despite what he went through his life, spent a lot of time working with other people, Mr. Francis McNeil. And it's interesting and it's historic. It was one of the first infrastructure projects of its kind that was named after an African American. So it's just good to see that this history is going to be restored. And I just want to just say thank you again to the members of the community for taking this on and making this happen, because without their initiative, without asking anybody, we wouldn't be this far. So thank you all very much. To my attention? Okay.
That bus was so crowded, it reminded me of the transportation that in South Africa when the people is out hanging outside in the bus. But this is the point. If you miss that one bus, you stepped down there. Wow, Pontchartrain Beach had 3 or 4 buses running all day.
Okay.
Give them the service that they gonna need. They gonna need that transportation or water to them because it's
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. All right.
Councilmember Morel, we have 2 online comments.
Okay, sorry, 2 online comments, then we'll go to the next time on the agenda.
First comment is from Janet Jupiter Tobias. I want to thank Mr. Reggie Ford, Mr. Stage Michael, and Ms. Trika Wallace, and all other team members for cleaning Lincoln Beach, preserving our history. I'm in full support for the reopening of Lincoln Beach. And the second comment is from Apollos McNeil. First, I thank you, councilpersons, especially JP Morrell, NOT. It makes no sense that this project has been dragging so long. Me working in economic development and being a grant writer, I understand that the dragging and submittance of proper documentation hinders us from making certain deadlines required for certain grants that Lincoln Beach is eligible for, and some that have passed. The assessment for Lincoln Beach was flawed from the beginning, seeing the assessments were based merely on the opening of the gate and not centered around the actual design of the beach and the items desired on the beach is one. $500,000 given to a team that did not give an assessment of species of animals nor plant life existence on location nor grade of sand, replacement of sands due to erosion, asbestos of facilities, etc. There were no aerial drone shots neither. Then we got to litter abatement where $150,000 was given to other organizations to do the same thing that was requested a long time ago for active work that was delayed by the project manager purposely, over 2,000 plus trash bags by Reggie, Sage, Patricia, and volunteers. When updates were requested and sent to email multiple times, neither did Robles or Austin Feldbaum updated concerning those things. Need I add, I had to attach important context just to get a response via email, even though told to call and leave voicemails. This type of communication is unacceptable. Request at this point is for replacement of the project manager and reassessment to another if possible. There seems to be an overload, miscommunication, dragged work, and hindrances that this PMP manager is responsible for. We need to know the deadlines at this time now for the American Rescue monies and ceiling amount that can be requested for New Orleans for Lincoln Beach. Can Joe Threat have new project managers assigned, someone who understands the people, organization, and is willing and able to make this succeed? Thank you all for your hard work. Let's get things done. God bless.
Thank you. All right. With that, we will go to the next item on the agenda. We have Mr. Jeff Asher, who will be making a presentation regarding emergency calls downgrading. Thank you, everybody, for attending today, and thank you for your patience going through this process. Are you asking if there'll be an answer to the online question? Well, what I can assure you is that I will follow up on the online question and I'll get an answer for it. Okay, well, I will get an answer to your question and I will get an answer in writing sent to you on that question. Okay? You're very welcome.
Good morning.
Hey, Jeff, before you get started, let me just make a quick comment. This is a very thorough report that you did, but it is also a report that's very alarming. And I want to make very clear that the data that you provide the council is in no way meant to attack any of our criminal justice stakeholders. This is actually meant so that we can really understand what's happening within our criminal justice system and so that we actually can face our reality and come up with the right solutions together. And that's the point of the data that you're going to present today. And while it's very dire, what we're going to see, the positive part about it is that there are solutions to deal with this particular situation. And the solution, in my opinion, is what we have discussed over and over and over again here on the city council, is to add more professionals to the NOPD to help with putting together police reports, to help with assisting victims of sex crimes, which we'll talk about in just a bit, so that when it comes to very serious emergencies, we still can deploy as best as possible commissioned police officers. So I just wanted to make that quick disclaimer before you started, Jeff. And with that, I turn it over to you.
You stole the disclaimer right off my page.
Okay.
I prepared a little bit written down because I wanted to make sure that I said everything that I was thinking. Usually I'm just off the cuff in these presentations, but I did want to say that the purpose of these analyses is to identify issues and bring those issues into the light through our role with the city council. The issues I'm going to discuss today, they have no villain at their heart. They are systemic issues. They are not the result of laziness, abuse, or malice, and acknowledging them does not imply that hardworking people are not doing their best. The idea behind these analyses is that public awareness, as you mentioned, of the problems is the first step towards establishing effective solutions. These analyses are not meant to spread defeatism, low morale, or cast blame on anybody. When problems are few, the analyses are showing positive trends, then usually they're very popular. When problems are plentiful and getting worse, they're very unpopular. But my goal, the analyst's goal, is the same every time, which is to speak truth to power. When murder's falling, response times are plunging, and NOPD's commission strength is returning to normal, I aim to be the first person in front of this body to say that those are the facts. But until then, I think that it's essential to identify, accept, and try to solve the critical problems that we have at hand. So just sort of setting the stage, NOPD in June of 2019 had 1,163 commissioned officers, plus 90 or so, I believe, recruits. Today, it's 948. And if you remember, I was here a month ago, and it was 26 more than that a month ago. So the number today is significantly lower than it was just a month ago, and obviously much lower than it was 3 years ago. This produces tremendous strain on the calls for service. A lot of what NOPD does, just responding to people that out there and have problems. The emergency calls for service the response times are definitely being affected, though, and NOPD said this after my last presentation, their focus is on the emergency responses. It's clear they have not gotten as bad as the non-emergency responses, but we're kidding ourselves if we say that they're not getting worse and that there are no issues with emergency responses. And the issue that I'm going to talk about today, today's presentation is only a little bit about response times. It's mostly about downgrading incidents in the call queue from emergency to non-emergency. And the share of those incidents that have gone down from emergency to non-emergency has increased substantially this year. And I'm not here to say that calls should not be downgraded. You get an incident, you realize that nobody's life is in danger. There's nothing that necessarily, there's no reason necessarily not to downgrade it if an officer is going to respond to a carjacking or a murder or some other situation where a person's life is actually in danger. It makes sense. It is a process that NOPD uses, all police departments across the country use. The problem is that they're doing it more often this year than in previous years. And when they do it, the outcome is more dire. The outcome is there are more consequences to it because the response time to a non-emergency call is so much longer this year than it has been in previous years. So sometimes you get calls where there's a long response time and the officer gets there and they write a report and there's no big issue. Other times it takes a lot longer. They get there early in the morning hours and the person's not there. The crime is not reported. The citizen is unsatisfied. And sometimes this happens with very serious incidents, as we'll talk about in a little bit. So the average response time and for a non-officer initiated emergency is increased from 15 minutes to 31 minutes from 2019. And I'm using 2019 usually as my baseline because that's when we had really the strength that was significant enough to respond to calls for service in sort of a national average manner. So that has doubled. Non-emergency response times have tripled or more from 2019, but and the median response has increased from 8 minutes to 10.6 minutes. And median is the 50 percentile. So 50% of emergency calls this year they respond to in 10.6 minutes. 50% of calls they respond to in longer. The average is sort of your guesstimate of the best of the typical response. And the reason that I prefer using average to median, especially in these situations, is that there's this very long tail of longer emergency responses. So hypothetically, in a situation where you've got 15 responses in a week and 8 of them take 5 minutes and 7 of them take 10 minutes, that's a 5-minute median response time. Now, the next week you have 8 of those responses, the same 15 responses, 8 of them take 5 minutes and the other 7 take 100 minutes. Your median response time is still 5 minutes. You're still getting to 50% of the calls. You're just not missing what's happening in all of the other calls. And so it's clear that NOPD is getting to a lot of calls quickly. It is not getting to as many calls quickly as it used to. 27% of calls for service that were emergency had a response time of 20+ minutes compared to 15% in 2019, and 10% of emergencies had had a response time of 60+ minutes compared to 3% in 2019. The other reason that the downgrading has an effect is that if more calls this year that might have been emergencies in 2019 or 2020 are being downgraded to non-emergencies, it makes it very difficult to compare this year's response to previous year's response, because those calls are getting treated as non-emergencies, even if this year, in previous years, they would have been treated as emergencies. So here we can see between 2019 and 2021, it was about 30% of emergencies were downgraded to non-emergencies. And they're downgraded because the physical risk to the caller is not immediate. They can manage a longer response. This year, it's up to 42%. And the calls that we're looking at here are those calls that only had a report to follow, a gone on arrival, or an unfounded disposition. These are the calls that where either something happened where NOPD had to write a report, or they got there and nobody was there. And so there's another disposition that's commonly used, necessary action taken. We're setting those aside just to give this sort of consistent baseline. If you included those, the numbers would actually go up, because you're talking about calls where the NOPD doesn't have to write a report. There wasn't a major crime. Virtually all major crime has either a report to follow, gone on arrival, or unfounded disposition.
Jeff, can I ask you, sorry, can I ask you
by all means.
two questions? One is about downgrading, and then you sort of made the other point, but I want to flesh it out a little bit. On the downgrading, does NOPD keep a statistic or a metric that would help a third-party analysis of why something's being downgraded? Because you said, I feel like, yes, sometimes there's a call for aggravated burglary when in fact it's somebody drunk just trying to open a door, and it doesn't rise to that level. On the other hand, if something really should be murder in the first degree and it's being called as, like shooting with an armed weapon, which I see on social media, those are two very different things. So I'm wondering how we capture the metric.
So the OPCD does in their dispatch logs attempt to sort of capture why these decisions are being made. Ultimately, we're talking about sort of two different things. One is changing the signal.
Right.
So from an armed robbery to a complaint, or from a murder to a fireworks. That is being captured in CAD, and we can see those changes being made. And that's relatively obvious. There's not sort of a survey form or any other explanation given as to why the downgrades happen. The best guess is that they're downgraded because given the seriousness of the incident, whether or not there's physical danger to the person would be my guess, and the availability of other units and the needs of the district to respond to other calls. And they're probably, I'm guessing that you sort of rank things differently. If you have 100 units that are available to respond, you're going to rank what you're responding to immediately differently than if you only have 2 or 3 units at a time.
And I guess it's easy for me to say this since I'm not on criminal justice, but as they're doing those audits, this may be something that we, the council, ask for. So that way we're not trying to piece together 911 is saying one thing and then you see a change and then we don't know what's happening, because seeing a 42% increase in downgrading deserves, I think, the explanation about the why. That's what you're really saying, I feel like.
Yeah, I think that and it gets to sort of my preface to all of these comments, that it's not being done because somebody's sitting there and making a malicious thought about it. I think it really is a systemic response to being overwhelmed by call volume and lack of resources.
And then the last thing, just quickly to flesh out, like maybe a couple months ago, as I was going to neighborhood meetings and was looking at the numbers. Remember, I emailed you and said, I don't understand. Crime looks like it went up in districts A, B, and C, but then it went down according to the metrics in D and E. And obviously the metrics show that 50% of the violent crime occurs in the 5th and 7th district. Do you mind explaining why that happens? And I think the calls for service is part of the explanation.
And I think your email is what got me rolling on all of this. So just thinking about it analytically. And we'll talk about this a little bit, and it sort of reads into this next slide, which is that the longer the response time, the more likely that the person leaves. And there was somebody that reached out to me, or I reached out to them on social media, and they had like an 11-hour response time. They called in something to a non-emergency line at 2:45. The officer came out at midnight, 12:30, left a voicemail. Person is sleeping, phone is on do not disturb. Nobody's there, and they leave. The officer doesn't have anything to report, and they mark it as gone on arrival. And the share of calls being marked gone on arrival is increasing, and it increases basically in lockstep with response times. And so districts that or places like the 7th district is a good example. I think it's so large. The response times are I think everyone would agree, are egregiously big. And because they're big, officers may not get to report as many calls that happen. And so you may have the call volume suggesting crime is up, but the number of reports, which is the only way to turn it into crime, is gone down. And it creates this dynamic where you can't base your crime numbers based on 911 calls. You have to get reports, but if you aren't able to reach there in a timely manner for a lot of things like that really drive crime numbers, like theft and vehicle burglary, that are rightly almost never emergencies, then it makes it difficult to accurately portray what's happening trend wise.
I mean, in short, the longer it takes to respond, the less likelihood somebody's going to sit around.
Yeah.
Wait. Thank you. Thank you, Madam President and Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Harris.
So this is a basic question, but who is the person who makes the call to downgrade the emergency?
Well, yeah, I think the council president has more information on this actually than I do.
So working with Councilmember Harris, working with Director Morris with the Orleans Parish Communications District, which allowed us to be able to receive information so that we can put together this report. And in conversations with him and in the reports that we received, it was clear that that it was an OPD rank that was doing the downgrading. But then he sent me a subsequent email yesterday confirming this and really kind of going step by step as to how the downgrades occur. And so I'll just read you just one paragraph from his email. And he says, all public safety agencies that OPCD receive OPCD services, NOPD, NOFD, NOEMS, and LASPCA preset prioritizes in our computer aided dispatch system. So when a call is generated, the priority set by that agency is assigned to the call. OPCD maintains a strict policy that no one shall downgrade any call for service unless given instructions by a ranking officer of the responding agency. If that happens, the dispatcher will add in the comment section who gave that instruction. So I just wanted to make that perfectly clear. Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you, Councilmember Harris.
So what we see is, as I mentioned, significantly longer response times for the downgraded incidents because they're non-emergencies, they're treated as such. And a much larger share of these are going to be answered in the early morning hours when call volume is lower, officers have time to basically get through the backlog, and it also happens to be the time when most people are asleep. And so what you see is this chart up here showing that the share of calls that were responded to where the officer arrived between midnight and 5 a.m. was over 70% of those were gone on arrival compared to report to follow, versus somewhere between 50 and 60% for pretty much every hour during the day. So between 6 a.m. and 10 or 11 p.m., they're much more likely to have a report written for calls that are going to have a report. And so this really shows that it's unfortunate that the backlog exists and then that it has to be cleared at a time when it's least likely to reflect what's actually happening. And the real issue, I think, is on this slide, which is that the gap between what happens in an emergency call and what happens in a non-emergency call has grown significantly. Right now, the difference is about 155 minutes longer for a non-emergency call than an emergency call. In 2019, when the share of calls that were being downgraded from emergency to non-emergency was lower, it also didn't matter quite as much. It was a 48-minute difference. So the odds that it really impacted what happened in the incident and how well it was recorded were much lower. Using the median, again, that same gap exists. It's now about an hour median. So 50% of the time, it's an hour difference between emergency and non-emergency. In 2019, there was virtually no difference. It was a 7-minute difference. And so what I did is I broke down incidents by a couple of what I thought were the critical incident types. And what you can see is that in each of these, aggravated assault, aggravated rape, armed robbery, and carjacking, combining those two incident types, attempted suicide, and I'll note a lot of attempted suicides have a necessary action taken disposition. So I included that in analyzing those calls, domestic disturbances, and simple battery domestic calls. Each one of these call types have had significantly higher share of calls downgraded from emergency to non-emergency than in previous years. So aggravated assaults, 36% this year compared to 23% between 2019 and 2021. Aggravated rapes, it's 44% so far this year through mid-August, compared to 30% in previous years. And you can go down the list and see all of these. And so these are incidents where in these cases, the victim's life is almost certainly not in danger. There's probably going to be outliers where something was unfortunately downgraded that shouldn't have been. But going through some of the dispatch calls, and I'll talk about that in just a second, it's not that these were incorrectly handled as non-emergencies. It's that the consequence of handling them as non-emergencies was so much starker than in previous years. And so we did a deep dive into aggravated rapes. We worked with OPCD and looked at the dispatch logs for these calls. 95 signal 42 and 42M calls in between January and July 2022. 40% of those were GOA compared to 26% not downgraded. Nearly 60% of the victims in these incidents were kids. They were 14 of them involving a kid under 10, and almost all of them were trying to report incidents that had happened in the past. So it wasn't this happened 10 minutes ago. It was weeks, months, years ago, even in a lot of cases. And over 40% of those incidents, 23 out of the 55 of those involving a child, were disposed of as GOA. It's my understanding that NOPD, at least informally, makes efforts to recontact these victims of sex crimes specifically, not of the other incidents I mentioned on the previous slide. But we're unable to tell from the CAD data the degree to which they were successful. And I know last month the council heard from the sex crimes investigators that they are so overworked and so overwhelmed by their caseloads that it's not clear the degree to which they're effectively making contact and able to basically give the victims of these incidents the attention that they deserve to have.
But Jeff, this is a perfect example of where a professional specialist could come in and be able to respond to these cases immediately, to be able to, for a victim of a sex crime who, at that moment now finally has the courage to report what happened to them, maybe a couple months ago, maybe several years ago, that finally has the courage to report. This would be a perfect opportunity for one of a sex crime specialist to come out and help the victim take down all the information and really begin the investigation process. I think the positive piece here is that there are positions available and created within sex crimes to have these specialists hired, and the salary is relatively good. I mean, it's between $40,000 to $55,000 last I checked, but it's really about pushing forward and really promoting these positions so that we can get people hired. And if necessary, even bumping the pay if that's something that's necessary as well. But I just wanted to make the point that this is what we're talking about. This is where having additional civilians could ensure that those who have had very terrible crimes committed against them could actually receive the investigatory services that they deserve. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to be clear that there wasn't evidence in the dispatch logs that these were victims whose lives were in danger, whose calls in theory were, inherently emergencies and needed to be treated as such. But getting back to the point that because the difference in how an emergency and a non-emergency incident is being treated these days, it led to, in a lot of cases, really unfortunate outcomes. And some of them, it sounded like that, they got frustrated and they said, I'm going to call back tomorrow. And it's, there's probably a good chance that that happened. Some of them were incidents where, in normal times, in an immediate response, they may have gotten there and found out that nothing actually happened and that it was gone on arrival or unfounded. And it's sort of the bulk of the incidents that probably would have been reported if not for the longer response times that I think is the major concern. And it's my sincere hope that they made contact with all of these people, but that it's sort of traumatic enough to be required to report it twice and to work up that courage again. But that's sort of the best outcome. The worst outcome is that people tried to report these things and just couldn't, and couldn't report the worst day of their lives happening to them. And so I think that that's really tragic to think about. So the characteristics, like I've mentioned for all of the calls, is that when the officers arrived and how long it took them were the two factors that appeared to be the most important for determining whether or not an incident got a report written or was gone on arrival. There were 2 reports where officers very clearly made plans early to meet the next day with the person, and they wrote a report. These had long response times formally because they didn't meet them until the next day, but everything seemed to be handled appropriately and they quickly made those plans. So I took those out as outliers from the second bullet here. And so the incidents that had a report to follow had a 75-minute average, 51-minute median response time, compared to 227 minutes average, 175-minute median for those incidents that were gone on arrival. There really wasn't a lot of notable difference in when the calls came in during the day, but when the officers arrived, 40% of the calls that were gone on arrival, they arrived between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. compared to less than 20% of those that were RTF. There was just one incident that received an RTF disposition where the arrival was between midnight and 6 a.m. And compared to 22% of the gone on arrival dispositions received a dispatch between 12 a.m. and 6 a.m. And just a couple of examples. There was an incident where there was an Uber driver that was calling on behalf of a passenger who was hysterical. She said that she had been beaten and sexually assaulted. The victim didn't have a phone when she was dropped off, and it was downgraded to non-emergency, and officers arrived 3 hours later. The Uber driver dropped her somewhere safe, told them where she was, and she wasn't there and received a gone on arrival disposition.
But let's talk about that. I mean, so this is a situation where, you have a woman who has said, oh my gosh, I have been brutally attacked. I have been raped. And you have an Uber driver who is kind enough to sit there with her. They call, nobody comes. He calls again, no one comes. And then he's like, I believe it was an hour, a little bit more than an hour. He's like, I have to go, but she is in a safe location. But then for someone who has gone through that type of trauma in that evening, to sit by herself at a supposed safe location, because I believe it was a restaurant. She's not to sit. She's going to sit by herself for 3 hours after she's been brutally raped. Like that's not going to happen. But what has been lost due to the fact that no one showed up in a short period of time And what could have been saved, if we had a trained professional who could have gone to meet her immediately, is this trained professional could have said, you know, ma'am, we need to get you to UMC, because that is where victims of sexual assault are taken, and that is where we do the rape kits. And they could have walked her through the process of what she would be going through next, and the importance of preserving evidence, and to also ensure that she gets the right type of treatment for her bodily injuries, but also for a potential mental health treatment that she would also need. And then she could have also had the opportunity to be connected with advocates like the ones you're going to hear from today, advocates from STAR, and additional assistance could have come her way. She would have learned about how she can apply for victim assistance to pay for her medical bills that she may need help with. All of these different things at that time when she needed someone, it was not available to her. I'm hoping that this victim eventually was brave enough to call back again, and maybe she got a better response, or maybe she was found somehow. But based on what we're seeing, this is a very brutal attack, a potential very brutal attack that may have just gone unreported.
And Council President,
Go ahead.
if I may jump in, I mean, you listened to this call, is that right?
Saw the dispatch log.
You saw
I
the
didn't listen
dispatch,
to it, but I
okay.
had the log.
So the super driver wasn't directed by 911 to take her to UMC.
Not
you
that I'm
know of.
aware. I'm just, the log just basically contains the notes. It's like the abbreviated version. So it's not really possible to say what they were told to do or suggested to do.
Right, but I mean, to the point, it sounds like if this call comes into dispatch, then you would think or hope that our 911 operators are trained to tell that Uber driver to take that person to UMC so that they can be treated and wait for law enforcement there.
Yeah, I mean, certainly plausibly. I don't want to speak to this specific incident because I don't have any insight into what happened. There were several incidents in the dispatch logs that showed that the person was at UMC at the time or had been to Children's Hospital or somewhere else and was seeking medical treatment at the time. But it's hard to say, especially with a lot of these where they weren't necessarily like this first example. They were much more like the next two where somebody was reporting that something that had previously happened. But it's hard to say from the logs exactly what they were told or what was suggested. And I don't want to suggest that anybody was doing anything wrong in that.
Right, I get it, but it also sounds like what you're saying is there are also logs where somebody's at a hospital waiting for law enforcement and it's coded as a gone on arrival.
Yeah, there were some where they would wait basically for the person to get done with the medical treatment, but that they weren't able to be dispatched when that person was done, so they went home and they weren't able to make contact.
It's just an overall shame.
Yeah.
Well,
And that, you know-
before you go, I know we're kind of like focusing on this incident, but I think it's very important to also include one other caveat in the state of Louisiana where we are today. Part of the process of when a person contacts NOPD regarding a rape that just happened, one, obviously, and we've talked about ad nauseum, is the preservation of evidence to make sure that when that case moves forward, that all evidence is obtained. And like Councilmember Harris said, that individual is brought to the proper facilities to have that done. But more importantly, in the state of Louisiana, as we stand now, you have a window to get emergency contraception. And if you miss the window for emergency contraception, and that window continues to shrink based upon legislative interpretation every day, if you have women who have just gone through a horrific trauma, who are trying to find out what the next steps are, when you have a sane nurse who's trained at UMC dealing with you and lets you know what all of your options are after obtaining that data, such as preemptively terminating the pregnancy you may have of the person you just raped you, when you don't have the response happen timely, and that person, because trauma victims, they go into a whole different time space as far as how they process their trauma. You have women who are not given resources, who have no police response, who after receiving this horrendous trauma, and in this case, for example, we're in a restaurant and then go home, you don't know when they're going to come out of that trauma to be functional again. And in the state of Louisiana where we are now, what happens when that woman who is trying to process the horrific violence that happened to her realizes that, wait, I might be pregnant with my rapist child, but the window for me to possibly have options has closed because the city of New Orleans, the New Orleans Police Department, and all the different departments failed to respond to me timely and make the resources available to me so that I could have advocates speaking on my behalf. Because realize it, and Star's going to come up shortly, but like part of how you get those assets involved, like a Star, is when they enter the system to go through the process. Because it's not like 911 takes in the call and goes, well, now else they're going to dispatch Star, for example. I mean, these women, for the most part, women or children, have to fend for themselves if they are not given resources.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I mean, that is the challenge, that the best case scenario is one in which there's effective follow-up the next day or, in the next few days. Even that, I think, has its problems. And I will talk, we're doing the deep dive into the aggravated rapes, but it really is a systemic issue because there's other types of incidents where there is no follow-up guaranteed, and it is on the victim to basically report it twice and relive it twice. And I think that that's certainly problematic and something that everybody should strive to have happen as few times as possible.
Right, and I think it's equally important. I know that Councilmember Moreno has ridden this horse and probably killed the horse at this point, but this council, as far back as February, I would say, to be polite, encouraged, but for most parts demanded that we accelerate the civilianization of the department to avoid situations like this and to provide alternative mechanisms for reporting. The example I use frequently, and I know it's also in your stats, is that even things as simple as a home invasion. I have that example I use frequently about the individual in Lakeview whose house was burglarized, I think it was at 10 a.m. in the morning. He was told by NOPD, rightfully so, please wait outside so we can process your home so we can get fingerprints. And they just forgot about him. And 6 hours later, finally, through other people, he called me and I got the 3rd District to respond. But when you talk about the trauma of a rape, the trauma of physical or whatever other types of violations they are, and the lack of urgency in addressing them, it doesn't just lead to horrific outcomes. It undermines people's faith in the department. And I know, but I hate to keep saying things, I'm going to ask Morgan, but there's a survivor network. And when survivors tell each other how awful the experiences were dealing with law enforcement in a jurisdiction or what the expectations are, it really hurts our overall ability to protect survivors and capture predators. And this lack of the sense of urgency to address the issue, and I'm not speaking towards the overworked detectives who deal with these crimes, I'm talking about the lack of resources being provided to them to get those ratios down and to address, because I mean, God forbid, what does the case look like you're building against the rapist when you have these huge time gaps between when the rape occurred, when the evidence was collected? I mean, you're talking about re-victimizing a victim. You're going to have a defense attorney who's going to want to subpoena everybody in the damn restaurant where she was sitting to make sure she stayed there that long. You said you waited 6 hours. Did you wait 3? I mean, we're creating more hurdles for victims to go through.
And I just have a quick follow-up. I don't know how much more we have to push, how much more we have to say, how many more proposals we have to put out there about adding more professional civilians to the NOPD. But Jeff, do you have any information as to, our level of civilianization compared to other police departments across the country. This isn't some type of novel idea. Like Helena isn't like coming up and saying like, this is so brand new or so out of the box. Like this is like the direction in which police departments are moving in. So how do we stack up with others?
So we're obviously much lower. I wrote down the numbers. So using the FBI's data for a city, 250,000 plus in 2021, 24.5% of the police departments that they had data on were civilian. In New Orleans today, it's 16.9% if you're using just civilians, recruits, and officers. That gap would grow even more if you're using reserve officers, because there's a lot of reserve officer, a fair number of reserve officers, and only a handful of reserve civilians. So it's the gap exists. If we were just to get to the national average based on this rough back of the napkin math, you'd add 80 civilians, and that would just get you to the national average. It wouldn't exceed some departments that are having 25, 30% of their workforce being civilianized.
Yeah.
And one way to think of it is, I know that this has been talked about and it's scary to think of it with climate change, that this isn't the fewest officers we've had in decades. This is the most officers we're going to have for the next few years right now.
Right.
That number is going to keep going lower. Will we hit 900 or so, which has been our pace for much of the year by the end of this year? Is there a floor? I mean, these are big questions. And so the best time to start thinking of these was, as you said, 6 months ago. The second best time is now. And I think that it's good to know about these problems, again, not casting blame on them, because then we can think of solutions, and there's no bigger solution than I think hiring.
And the thing is, we have to move with urgency.
Yeah.
Urgency. That is what is continuing to lack, is the urgency around, we have the solutions. We see them. The solutions are there, but it's let's move. Let's move. We keep hearing it's like, oh, it's going to be time to make some hard decisions. Make the hard decisions. Let's move with urgency. We're so far gone. This is the time to act. Was a year ago. The next best time to act is now, and that's what we demand from an OPD leadership.
And just to follow up on that, the number one complaint we get from officers, as you know, Jeff, because you have the numbers, when we went to 12-hour shifts, it accelerated the amount of officers who were leaving. And the longer you take to civilianize the workforce, to reduce the amount of work that officers are having to do, you're actually accelerating the departure of officers. Because if we had 80 additional civilians yesterday, if we had, God bless, our sexual assault investigators who have ridiculously large caseloads, at some point, especially when you're talking about homicide detectives, you're talking about those people investigating domestic violence or sexual assault, they burn out. They literally just flame out like a nurse during COVID. And if you don't have the resources to make their job manageable, one of two things happens. If they're old enough, they retire. If they're young enough, they go to a department that gives them the resources. And the longer we wait to provide those resources, to remove that burden that's on the officers who remain, every officer that leaves, I remember when the officer quit mid-shift a couple of weeks back, and he very publicly just said, I'm out of here. And you had the police chief come out and say, well, that guy abandoned his brothers, and it's a bad thing he did that. And the response I got from officers was, no, the department abandoned him. You get to a point where that officer said when he left, he had 55 calls on the backlog before he signed in. That's not 55 things that happened on his watch. That's the old stuff. And when you have officers who are coming into a 12-hour shift, dealing with 6 hours of additional work on the front end, you cannot be surprised or vilify them when it breaks them. And the reality is, like you said, we are not going to have a sudden influx of officers to defeat attrition. Our attrition rate is going to burn through our recruits as is now. The sooner, the urgency, the immediacy of addressing the civilianization issue will actually help with retention, because it will stop the burnout. And the longer we take to do civilianization, to take some of these, like you said, non-emergency cases off the backlog, but the guys who show up, if you got a case reported at 12 a.m. and they're responding at 12 hours later, or even 11 hours later, you're talking about 2 shifts later.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, your officers who leave their 12-hour shift, come back, And the same crime they reported from their first shift is waiting for them when they get back to the next one. That's untenable.
I mean, yeah, I agree fully with all that. And I think it's a challenge. I don't think New Orleans is alone nationally in dealing with this, but it is something people sort of ask why all of these crime murder trends are happening in New Orleans. And they just happen here. They just happen everything. They happen here like they happen everywhere. They just happen more so here. And I think that we're definitely seeing that. So real quick, I'll go over the last slide, which is that each of these incident types that I talked about have a much higher share that were gone on arrival when they were downgraded compared to when they were not downgraded. For example, 77% of aggravated assaults that were downgraded were gone on arrival compared to 50% of the non-downgraded. The domestic calls, I'll point out that those that were downgraded were 2/3, 3/4 gone on arrival compared to under a quarter for those that were not downgraded. And so I think that we have to separate the need to respond to the victims, that their lives are in danger. They needed an officer with a badge and a gun immediately, and the consequence of doing so. And I think that the more that we talk about it, the more that we realize what's happening, the more we acknowledge what's happening, the better our policy response will be. And then real quick, because I know Stars is going to come after me, I barely changed these slides from when I was here a month ago. We know that crime underreporting is endemic. We know that the commission strength is unlikely to regain itself anytime soon. And we're talking about 200 plus officers that need to be replaced. That workload needs to be replaced. And that 200 plus is, 200 below 200 where they were in 2010, 2011 timeframe. So just to get back to where we were 3 years ago, we're talking about 200 plus officers that we're not going to get commissioned officers anytime soon in those roles. So we need to think outside the box. The best, I think, idea is increased civilianization, expanding phone and online reporting as well, and then identifying calls that maybe you can downgrade safer, that they rarely have reports written, they're rarely meeting victims. They're being treated more as emergencies, and like burglar alarms. There's thousands of emergency burglar alarms. 99% of them are false alarms. We still have thousands, even though that number's come down. So I would advise thinking better about how we're upgrading and downgrading emergency calls.
I think to that point, I will tell you that both from personal and anecdotal experience, I've had calls and people have made calls saying my car got broken into. I just need a police report. And there is no mechanism right now where the operator who takes your call can just say, here is the website, or if you give me your number, I can text you a link to make an online report. That would move that person just out of the stack completely. And even when I've told people, listen, I mean, I've literally had people call, I've called and said, hey, somebody rifled through my car, nothing was stolen. I don't need an officer to respond. I'm making you aware because I saw the person leaving. They might be still in the neighborhood. 6 hours later, an officer knocks on my door and goes, hey, I'm here for the report. And I said, I don't need a report. I told the operator who I spoke to, nothing was stolen. My car got rifled through, but that goes to the inefficiency of how we were managing it. Because if we're not even triaging the calls where people literally on the call say, listen, I'm just giving you an FYI. I don't even need a police response, but I thought it might be worthwhile if you've got a unit nearby. I saw the guy rifling through my car leave. I'm just making you aware of it. They're just sticking them in the same stack.
Yeah.
And to your point, I know that there is an online portal that is available to report property crimes. We make no effort as a city to advertise that portal exists. We make no effort proactively. I always comment on the fact when it comes to NOLA Ready or whatever else, they will email, text you, find you to spread the message of what they want to spread. But when there's really important things like, for example, informing the public, hey, if you have a break-in of your car and you know what's stolen and you need a report, click this link, save this link. so that we can maximize our officers responding to violent crime, I think the vast majority of people would do that. And if the portal needs to be more friendly, it needs to be an app, I don't know, whatever the heck it has to be, we need to make those investments to reduce the amount of officers that have to respond, because it seems like based upon our behavior, we're still operating from the Pennington Comstat model, where we're operating as the department that has multiple districts and 1,600 officers, when we'll never have that number of officers. We have too many districts, and it's almost like procedurally we don't want to acknowledge this is a smaller department that has to act smarter.
And I think on the online police reports, I think we should start with having that be part of the NOPD website, because right now it's housed within within NOLA.gov in a very, very random, weird spot. But also to your point, Council Vice President, whether it's somebody trying to report something online or what, it could be someone who doesn't have access to online services, but still would like to report the fact that their car was kind of rifled through. That comes again to expansion of civilian opportunities, because that's the other piece that we're dealing with, is that civilians right now can only respond on investigations dealing with sex crimes, child abuse, PIB, and HR kind of background services. So what Jeff and I have constantly been saying is that we need for additional opportunities for civilians to be used, for example, property crimes. Like, that just makes all the sense in the world. But as Councilmember Druso knows very well, that process has been very slow. Civil service has been asking for these questionnaires on expansion of these different types of civilian positions for roughly about a year, and that information has not been provided to civil service. Just recently, Judge Morgan started having these combined meetings with civil service, with NOPD, and kind of working on bridging the gap. And now civil service actually has started putting together some documents, because NOPD wasn't able to, and now has given them to NOPD these questionnaires and proposals saying, does this work for you? And so that just goes to the point where we also apparently need some significant administrative help for NOPD to be able to put together, these questionnaires and develop these civilian positions, because for some reason that work is not getting done. And Councilmember Druso, from what I understand, that the monitoring team is now even kind of embedded in NOPD, dealing with just the issue of civilianization and making sure that everything's going through civil service properly, and that the documentation is being provided to civil service.
Councilman Green has his button pressed.
Maybe I can ask, I'll ask after the meeting, Councilman Druso, how that's working, because civilianization is so important. I recognize that. I actually don't have a question, but I want to give an example to the public who is watching. First off, I was carjacked, and I want to say that I appreciate the response of the New Orleans Police Department to my incident. They were there. The guy who took my car smashed into somebody else on Paris Avenue, and there were multiple officers who responded to that one and did assist the person who was in the automobile that was hit by the person who stole my vehicle. They also did the proper reports, cleaned up the scene. Someone came to clean up the scene afterwards. And since then, I've had an opportunity to go around to many incidents or scenes of incidents that have happened. And it's encouraging to see a number of police officers, but it also reminds me of the difficulties. And I hate to use numbers, so I'm going to say that this was just one day. I don't want to give a lot of signals to the criminals that there isn't enough police response out there, because for emergencies there is in many instances. But just a couple of weeks ago, I and Councilmember King went to a police roll call in the 5th District, and I've gone to multiple roll calls. And for a district that includes from the St. Bernard Parish line to Elysian Fields, the river, all the way to Galvez, from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., there were 5 officers available for patrols. Now, let us keep in mind, and I hate to use those numbers, and I'm going to tell the criminals that that was that one night. So you missed your opportunity, because now there are more. Just figure it out yourself. but don't be stupid and think that there's 5 officers every night. But I'm so tired of using numbers, but I had to use that number to give an example. But if there's a shooting, as there was, for example, during that time period, not one officer can respond. You've got to pick up shells. Sometimes you've got to interview witnesses. You have to secure the site, which is important. Civilianization is going to work in some respects, but civilianization is not going to solve everything, because in order to go to court, in order for the district attorney to prosecute, sometimes things can't be done on emergency calls by civilians. But I understand the civilianization relative to property crimes, to traffic accidents and the like, but I also know how tough defense attorneys are going to be relative to civilianization testimony. You know, civilian testimony versus sworn officer testimony. But that's something that we can deal with. But we did bring up another issue that I think that the council is on top of, and that is the lack of coordination sometimes between agencies. 311, for example, or 911, if someone says exactly as was said previously, that I don't need an officer there, I don't know. Maybe it's actually a pretty good idea that you not send an officer and that you wait. However, I don't know if that's written in the rules that that's acceptable. If you get the call, you probably have to respond to it, but I don't know. But that's what we're doing as a council by bringing the various parts of criminal justice together on a regular basis, so that, which is quarterly, but we also have the ability to communicate with them. I sometimes will tell you that my only response is to say, we probably aren't going to get that onrush of 200 officers in the very near future. I want to encourage the public and all of us, and I'm going to do it too. I haven't done it as well. I tell people to file online reports, but I don't advertise it enough in my newsletter. But you can file an online report for a property crime. You can also wait, and then a police officer will come. But for example, the insurance companies accept online reports, and they understand where we are in New Orleans right now. Also, there are instances where it's important to recognize that the police aren't doing nothing when you call them. They're not just sitting at a donut shop, not able to respond to calls. If they come hours later, it's an unfortunate fact, but many times it's because you have a limited number of officers in a district, and they go from call to call to call. I use a prime example that I was at a site in my district where there was a shooting with individuals involving multiple guns, and they shot through a community, hit 2 houses, and actually hit a building which was owned by a federal government agency. And during the middle of that call, where they were picking up the 72 bullet casings and also doing reports on the person who had his house shot into, and also had responses that they had to make with the federal government, they got another call about another shooting, which resulted in a murder. So multiple officers had to go there, and then another officer had to come, because you can't just ignore the crime scene. So in a nutshell, I look forward to the civilianization. I'm going to do my part, maybe as a member of the Criminal Justice Committee, to do what we can to advocate for it. But in the meantime, I just want to make it clear that, as I saw at the 5th District, which was just that night, again, I emphasize the difficulties in covering a territory that large, to getting to the backlog if you get only one other call. Because most calls for service, many of them, especially if they're violent or suggested of violence, require multiple response teams. Might be just 2 officers in different vehicles, but I doubt that there's many instances where there's just one officer who responds to, for example, a scene of a shooting. And we have scores of shootings in our city, unfortunately, every month. I don't really have a conclusion, but I wanted to use that as an example of how difficult it is and how important civilianization is, and that the Criminal Justice Committee and this council need to do everything that we can to, with due haste, get more civilians. You're talking about 80 more civilians, potentially?
I mean, I would argue.
To bring it up to the natural average.
Yeah, I would say 200 if you're replacing 200 officers.
Right.
Let's set 500 as the goal and hire 200.
And you're absolutely right to use that as an example, just for the public to know too. That's right. 80 would bring us up maybe to the national average, but we've lost a number of officers, and we can't focus on just national average. So I want to encourage citizens to recognize that we are moving toward involving more civilians in the operations of the department. There are vacant civilian positions right now within the New Orleans Police Department. And I want the public to recognize that you should feel free to respond to some of those opportunities. I am, for example, sponsoring an NOPD information event on next Wednesday at 5 o'clock p.m. at the Homer Hit Center at UNO. And it's designed to let people know about some of those civilian opportunities that exist now. We may have more information on civilian opportunities that are going to exist in the future. And it will also explore opportunities that citizens have to utilize the services of online technology, and also potentially use of phone calls, and also to understand what goes on at 311, 911, how you can even assist those agencies in helping making our citizens safer. But I do appreciate all the information that you provided, and I don't like to emphasize numbers, but today it was important to emphasize numbers, especially since I had been to the 5th district. It's a very, very challenging job. It's a very, very challenging environment in which we make right now. The police have made 2,500 felony arrests this year. And it's a very difficult job to do, but I also recognize that there's so much more that we can be done. And I look forward to working through the committee process and also through this council to enhance the safety that is available to our citizens. Thank you for your report.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. That's all we have for you. Next up,
Thank you.
We have presentation by Star.
Screen mode, and then you can just.
How are you? Just fine. How are you doing? Let's take a picture. Okay. Look, I thought you wanted to take a picture of all my strategic notes tonight.
Good morning. My name is Morgan Lamondre. I'm the Policy and Compliance Director at STAR. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with STAR, I know I've certainly worked for many years with Councilwoman Helena Marino and JP Morrell, but STAR stands for Sexual Trauma Awareness and Response. So it is much easier to say STAR. We are a sexual assault organization. We have locations in Alexandria, Baton Rouge, and New Orleans. And we most recently, I guess you could say, opened our New Orleans office in 2016. JP was the one who was at our ribbon cutting ceremony. But just to give you like a little overview of STAR, I have some slides just for the visual members of the council. This is our location, depending on how you say it, either Genois or Genoise. There's many people who say it differently. This is our building. I believe we are in Councilmember Harris's district, our building. So for those of you who, if you want a tour, please, by all means, call us and we'll be happy to give you one. So, but overall, the services we provide to survivors are advocacy, counseling, and legal. All of our services to survivors are completely free of charge. So advocacy is sort of like the case management. That is where we have our 24/7 response. So right now we have a 24/7 hotline that if any survivor calls this hotline, they are able to talk to a trained advocate who could direct them to UMC for a forensic exam, explain sort of the process. And then that program also includes our 24/7 hospital advocates or medical advocates that go to UMC to accompany survivors for forensic medical exams. We have counseling, which is licensed counselors. All of those services are free. And then we actually provide legal representation for free for survivors. And one of the things that's really been important about our legal program is that what we have said is justice doesn't always mean jail, and it comes in many forms for survivors. And what we have seen is an increase in our legal representation services to NOLA survivors because they are able to find justice as what it means to them in the civil system or an administrative system like Title IX hearings, because right now it does take a much longer time to obtain any sort of justice in the criminal legal system. Another thing that we offer for as part of our programs are prevention, education, and training and technical assistance. I will say one of the things that has been unfortunate for us is that we have had significant cuts, like most people, but in particular for the Victims of Crime Act funding in New Orleans. So that has cut the funding for our survivor services. And one of the ways we have tried to supplement those cuts is to offer earned income types of services. And so just to give you an example, last year from Boca Orleans, the program that provides funding to our survivor services, we received $223,000. This past year, we were only provided with a little over $92,000. So that was a very big cut, and we've had to try to supplement the income for survivors and those services by offering services to the business community. And so this is just, we wanted to kind of explain some of the barriers we're seeing for survivors in New Orleans to reporting, to obtaining different services. And I do want to say that sometimes we'll use the term survivor, sometimes we'll use the term victim. Obviously, when we're talking about the criminal justice system, we tend to use the word victim because that's what it's defined in our criminal code. But obviously, for different individuals, they may identify as a victim or a survivor, depending on where they are in the process. So I kind of just wanted to point out, I think most people know this, but rape is definitely one of the most underreported crimes. And in particular, I would say in New Orleans, looking at this statistic, obviously this is of the rapes that are reported. So STAR sees a lot of survivors that have not reported to New Orleans, to the police department. But the problem for us tends to be when we're talking to survivors, explaining their options and them asking, what are the chances of them getting justice or getting taken seriously by going through the criminal justice system? And it's already really hard. And we know that, most perpetrators of rape do not get prosecuted. There aren't as many arrests in general. So when you have a system where there's so many news articles, there are many survivors who are explaining to everyone that they are just hopeless. It becomes a problem for us to seriously provide them with information about how to go about reporting and reporting to an OPD in particular. I have sort of just these overall trends, and I could give you some specific examples of what things have happened that it is a problem for survivors, but overall long response times to make a report. Our advocates, one of the things that they'll do is, or at least in the past, they would call sex crimes detectives directly, and they could arrange for an appointment for a sex crimes detective to come to the New Orleans office, which you saw the outside of our office. If you're inside the office, you'll see it's a warm and inviting space and a much better place for a survivor to make that report to law enforcement and obviously have an advocate with them when they're making that report. Well, back in the day, they were able to just do that and not have to go through sort of a dispatch officer, and somebody would come out, take the report, and then there was like clear expectations of when follow-up would be or what the process was. Recently, an advocate had an experience where a survivor wanted to make a report with an advocate at STAR. The advocate told her, you need to report, like, we need to call right now, right when we opened. And that was at 8:30 in the morning. There was some initial trouble just getting on the phone at first because the advocate was the one who initially made the call. And when she said, may I place you on hold to the operator to tell the survivor, hey, the operator is asking for some initial information. the operator hung up before she could hand the survivor the phone. And that, understand that happens. They were able to follow up. The survivor gave some information. And then it was, maybe an hour or so later, the survivor expressed to the advocate that, I am a little concerned about time if this is going to take too long because I have, doctor's appointments at 3. I have to pick up my kids at some point later in the day. And so they called somebody, I think it was the operator, to explain that if somebody doesn't come out by 2, then there's no point to coming out because the survivor is going to need to leave. So obviously time goes on. Around 2 or so, the survivor did have to leave. We close our office at 5 and we received a call at some point, or we found out at 5:15, a dispatch officer finally showed up. And so I think that's one of those cases that initially it's deemed gone on arrival, but it doesn't tell the full story. It's not, the gone on arrival thing obviously is a standard police term that's used, but it almost looks like possibly like a survivor is not cooperating. I think it's clear in New Orleans that's not the case, but it's one of those things that it doesn't tell the full story. So the other bullet I make is, there are unclear timelines for when an investigation will occur. So before, if you had that interview with a detective, after the fact, you may have a follow-up interview with another detective, or that, the detective will go interview some people and then come back and get additional information. There's just no clear guidance now on, once the dispatch officer comes out, if a detective will follow up, who's going to follow up and when. And then obviously communication is hard right now. It takes a lot of time and energy from our advocates to assist survivors, and obviously survivors get frustrated, but there's not even clear guidance on when somebody could possibly follow up. The other thing that gets to be a little frustrating, and as an attorney for me is somewhat frustrating, is that you hear all the time where survivors are told basically, well, we can't find the suspect for an interview, or the suspect refuses to be interviewed, and then everything just pauses and it's like left open indefinitely without there being some sort of, okay, well, like we have to move on beyond that. We can't, obviously there's a suspect doesn't have to talk. So doing other things to get the evidence you need to then present to a judge to see if you have probable cause for an arrest. And that's the one I find most alarming. And the other big thing too, which I sit on the Sexual Assault Oversight Commission, and a couple of months ago, at some point, somebody from New Orleans actually spoke to the commission because we want to do statewide tracking on sexual assault rape kits. And New Orleans had already started that process, and there is a tracking program, but right now survivors don't have access. And I'm still unclear about if all of the kits are tracked currently in New Orleans through this process, but it is my understanding that New Orleans has received money and it has a tracking program, but survivors don't have access. So the problem then becomes, a lot of times you'll hear survivors being told, we're waiting on the DNA, we're waiting on the DNA. And I've had conversations with, I keep wanting to say representative, but Councilwoman Helena Moreno, about how the problem we see is that everything seems to be sent to the crime lab when it doesn't have evidentiary value. So if a survivor knows exactly who sexually assaulted them, and the perpetrator is also potentially saying it was consensual, the DNA does not prove or disprove a rape occurred. It may in certain instances, but what happens is by not triaging and prioritizing certain types of rape kits, it kind of floods the system overall. And so I think that's one of the things that we hear, and people will, there's this overemphasis of the DNA that then you don't see detectives doing sort of the regular detective work that is required to make a case. and things get lost. So whether it's video evidence, there are certain things that are lost, but obviously, and I'm very happy that Councilmember JP Morrell had mentioned this, we do need to somehow find a way to ensure that survivors are getting the information they need to go to the hospital, because although the DNA may not be completely as relevant to certain types of investigations, it's the forensic examination by the actual examiner, documentation of bruises, documentation of injuries, and most importantly right now too, prevent prophylaxis to prevent STIs and pregnancy. That definitely, a huge victimization, you're already raped, but then if you become pregnant as a result of rape, that is certainly a type of victimization that we want to prevent as well. But I want to also mention just the Orleans delegation in our legislature has been really great allies to us. Representative Jason Hughes did just pass a bill that was unanimously passed that actually mandated all hospitals provide survivors of sexual assault with emergency contraception. So that's definitely one of those things that we're very excited about, but we need to make sure that survivors know to go to the hospital. And I think Councilmember Morrell, really nailed it when he said we need to make sure that there's some sort of information when you're in that trauma state. You're not thinking about the possibility of sexually transmitted infections or pregnancy. You're just, am I safe now? And I'm happy to answer any questions, but I do have somebody here that I think could share her story that is pretty compelling.
Yeah,
here.
Lauren, go ahead. If you want to share, and then I'll take questions from Councilmember Harris and then Jeruso.
Thank you. My name is Lauren Slater, and I'm a mechanical engineering student at Purdue University. I flew here from Indiana for the opportunity to speak to you all today. I've been writing this statement over and over again, trying to find a way to express what I've been through. When I was 19, just over a year ago, I spent my summer in New Orleans for an internship. One night, as I was out at the bars with some other interns, an intern I barely knew and two of his friends decided to take me home with them to use my body as they pleased while I was incapacitated. After reporting my assault, nobody ever reached out to me again. It took almost 2 months of calling to reach my detective, who did not even know who I was. I was then asked to fly to New Orleans to give an in-person interview, where the detective informed me she would not contact the intern or attempt to identify the other 2 men who could have possibly assaulted me until she received the rape kit results. It took her 5 months to get my rape kit submitted for testing. First, I was told the detective never signed out my rape kit in person. Then after I was told it had been submitted, it was actually not submitted until 2.5 months later, as they had told me they couldn't find it. I still spend every single day over a year later waiting for the phone call that will tell me if my body was used that night by 1, 2, or 3 men. I'm struggling to accept the fact that I'll most likely never know what happened to me that night. However, given the detective didn't get accounts from anyone else there that night, all video footage or other evidence is long gone. The detective didn't even try to find the men involved, and I still don't have the rape kit results. I feel I've lost my only chance at justice. My mom will now have to live knowing that the daughter she once held in her arms now spends her free time reliving the worst night of her life in unanswered emails. My dad will have to live knowing that there are men out there who have done this to his daughter and will get away with it. I wish more than anything that I could protect my little sister from this world that is so much more dangerous than she knows. Not only this, but when I received the exam to collect evidence from my rape kit, I was illegally charged by both the hospital and an ER physician, and one of my bills was sent directly to a collections agency without even sending me a bill first. It took months of communicating with the hospital, crime victim reparations, the ER physicians group, the collections agency, star lawyers, and advocates to finally get these bills resolved. I've been trying for months to even find a place to report this, and I've been shut down by everyone, including the Louisiana Department of Health that said that they do not handle billing cases. Managing my situation has quite literally been a part-time job for me. I'm spending my one chance at college researching laws surrounding victims' rights between going to lectures, calling attorneys instead of going out with friends, fighting illegal hospital bills instead of doing my homework, filing complaints, calling advocates, reading old articles, and doing absolutely everything I can to advocate for myself when I should have been able to trust the systems in place to do their job. I will never get this time back, and I'll spend years in therapy recovering from not just my assault, but from the 13 months and counting of reliving my assault and countless phone calls and emails begging to be taken seriously. I will always have to live with the knowledge that nobody, including the police, will be there to help me when I need it most. I want to emphasize that my case is not unique. It was made clear to me in my interactions with many people and entities throughout this process that this is a story that they hear from victims often. I was told that this is unfortunately just the way it is, and I'm begging you all today to change that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren, for coming before us and taking the trip to be here, and really for your courage. We're very sorry about what happened to you, and we're incredibly sorry about the way that you were treated in the aftermath and all different levels of government. Morgan, I authored the law, but you're going to have to recall what year it was when I was in the legislature where we said that victims of sexual assault would not be billed for services received because of the attack upon them. When did we pass that law, and what's happening? I mean, this was not supposed to happen to Lauren. She shouldn't have been billed.
Right. So it was in 2015 when we passed, and I actually spoke to Lauren about this yesterday and told her you were the one who authored the bill. And looking at the statute, because in the statute, and I remember the testimony where we talked about if somebody violated those provisions, their license could be revoked. And it says the law, if you fail to follow all of these parts, including the billing issue, then it shall be grounds for basically the hospitals to have their licenses revoked. And it says it's part of the standards. Well, Louisiana Department of Health is who investigates standards that are broken. The problem is if you go to their website, it says that they don't investigate billing issues. You need to contact the Department of Insurance. So the weird thing is that we created the law, I guess, to basically say, well, under this small caveat, the billing issue is considered a health standard. Right. And so, I believe Lauren called them. They said, contact the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office said, we don't investigate. And so I'm trying to resolve that issue because this isn't the first time we've been told that LDH doesn't investigate this, but then that means there's no administrative recourse for survivors who are billed. Now, she worked, as she said, she advocated for herself. STAR helped as well to get the issue billed, but I believe she also talked to somebody at Crime Victims Reparations, and they acknowledged to her that they still hear that people are getting sent bills.
Okay, let's talk about this afterward. I'll call the Secretary of Health myself and try to get this hopefully straightened out behind the scenes so that we don't have to get an ally of ours, a member of the New Orleans delegation, to bring up new legislation in the spring session. Councilmember Harris.
Lauren, I have to echo your courage in just being here and telling your story. And you're not alone. I just want you to know that, and that we're here for you to try to make things better. And that's why we're having these hearings. I can't imagine what you've gone through. And so I really do admire you for speaking up. I do want to ask Morgan this. When you say overall trends seen by advocates, you mean here in New Orleans, is that correct?
Yes.
But you also work out of Alexandria and Baton Rouge.
We have locations in each, we have offices in each location. We serve 15 parishes though.
So how do your experiences in those other 15 parishes, or you can just pick Alexandria or Baton Rouge, compare to what's happening here in New Orleans?
So Baton Rouge right now is definitely short-staffed, in particular sex crimes detectives. It's not the same in terms of if you call 911, somebody's coming. An officer will be dispatched, and then you're still going to have your 24/7, the acute emergency type calls. So we're not seeing anything like what we're seeing here. But for the cases where there's an assessment, so to speak, of no longer danger the sex crimes detectives in Baton Rouge do have an increased caseload, I would say.
But there is actual response time that's quicker than in New Orleans, than we're seeing in New Orleans.
Yes.
What about in Alexandria?
Alexandria, there's typically no issues with response time. I would say Alexandria has some other challenges that it's kind of interesting depending on where you go. We may have great response time, but the trauma-informed trained officers are not quite, so I will, to put a positive spin, we do have more trained trauma-informed detectives in New Orleans than in certain other areas. The problem is it kind of doesn't matter if you never get to talk to them.
And how many detectives, if do we have currently in New Orleans that are trained for sex crimes? I think it's only like 3.
I was going to say 5, but I guess it just depends because I know that there was some overlap in terms of the child abuse detectives were also, and those used to be separate units. We used to have like a very clear roster that they would give us actually. I don't know the answer. I thought it was 5.
Do you so you don't have access to the roster as if you need to get back to me, that's fine. Just so if you don't have the roster, I can make sure you get the roster.
I think we have the roster. The problem is that sometimes right now there's not a lot of communication. And so sometimes we don't know if it's because they're gone or if it's because, they're just really busy.
Does 911 know about your services, to your knowledge?
I do not know. I do not know the answer to that.
Okay. So it sounds like we have some to-dos to do together, including making sure that 911 dispatch understands the services that you provide, getting you the roster. I'd also like you to talk a little bit about how people can find you because, I know about it. The people watching, the very few people who are watching can hear from you, but generally victims don't know. I mean, Lauren, how did you find STAR?
When I got the rape kit done at the hospital, they provided an advocate to sit with me. And then from there, they asked me if I'd like to stay in contact with them further.
Okay.
Right. And the thing is, so if there were a scenario, going back to that scenario that was presented about the Uber driver, if there was some way that survivor would have been informed about STAR, or somebody would have called STAR, we actually have certain travel grants, so we very well could have made contact with that survivor. Somebody could have actually used our own Uber account to get an Uber to you, to bring that survivor to UMC directly. The problem though, it's like what comes first. And a lot of times we're seeing survivors because there is an emergency response. The hospital will dispatch, call us and ask for an advocate to come be with the survivor. And that's sort of their general link. I think there's sometimes people who will Google, and if they Google will probably come up, but it's, depending on the situation, it may not be that they will find us.
I do want to come for a tour, obviously, because you're in my district, but also because of the services that you provide. And I think you put the point on the DNA triage. I mean, we have this backlog of DNA rape kits, and Lauren's absolutely right. There may have been video or some other evidence that could be collected that isn't DNA that could have helped resolve this case. So, as we get our DNA lab up and running, which we have pushed for, I think there needs to be that triage. I think, quite frankly, we need to be looking at outside DNA labs to be processing this quicker than the state lab. But again, Lauren, I just want to thank you for your advocacy for yourself and for other survivors. And Morgan, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I wanted to emphasize a point that one of the things that I've noticed that other jurisdictions commonly use as an investigative tool that is not often used in New Orleans, and it's a powerful tool that I believe could be utilized through civilian personnel, is controlled calls. So where a survivor makes a call to a perpetrator to try to say in an instant, like, can you tell me what happened? And they acknowledge, yeah, you were so drunk and I had sex with you, is an admission of a third degree rape, essentially. And you record it, and we're a one party consent state, and that is very helpful evidence. And that's going to be more helpful than any DNA evidence. But you see a lot of times where survivors are also told, like, well, we're waiting on the DNA evidence. And there may be some strategy for certain types of investigations for that. But, while you're waiting on the DNA evidence, you can also ask the people, especially if there is a way to identify them, what happened. And, if they are unaware that DNA evidence is pending, they may actually say, well, nothing happened. And then once you get the DNA evidence back, it's like you can confirm there was some sort of contact. So I do see very often where it seems to be this over reliance on DNA when it doesn't actually prove or disprove a rape. Obviously for children, where consent cannot, you can't consent, that DNA is important. And then maybe when you don't have a memory of what happened, it could certainly help. But the big thing is the loss of video surveillance, especially, in New Orleans, I know we're talking about aggravated rapes, which is now first degree rapes, but in New Orleans, we do have a lot of third degree rapes because of the nature of, festivals and that kind of thing. And that's usually when a rape occurs, when somebody is too incapacitated or intoxicated to consent.
And as we've heard from NOPD, I mean, we do have cameras, they abound in our city. And so the loss of camera evidence, especially as you say, where it may be at a bar or a festival or something, is just really tragic because bars have cameras.
Right.
Thank you, Morgan.
Councilmember Druso, followed by Green.
First, I just wanted to say to Lauren, our apologies. I know Councilmember Moreno already said it, but I think a lot of times in government, people forget this isn't a case, but it's a person. And I think it's a good inflection point for all of us to remember that it may be our job, but you're dealing with somebody who's been severely hurt. We want you to know that. Morgan, you started touching on and anticipating sort of the question I was going to ask you, which is, obviously you've been here and you heard us spend a whole lot of time talking about personnel and civilianization versus NOPD. Are there some best practices that you've seen from other jurisdictions about either using police themselves or other personnel like social workers in helping DV victims in the best way to collect evidence early and then also to support the survivor in this? So
it's actually funny because I'm not aware of any other jurisdictions where there is civilians that are working. NOPD was the first, I guess, jurisdiction where we saw even social workers helping with like answering, responding. There's some places that have victim assistance coordinators and all, but I haven't really seen that used in at least the 15 parishes, at least not that I'm aware of. But I do think that where we could have certain people trained is sort of somebody doing, I mean, even if it's coming up with an assessment form, that also emphasizes safety. Like, is the person who is the suspect going to have continuous contact with the survivor, but sort of the circumstances of the sexual assault and getting the information. I mean, obviously us as lawyers at STAR who represent the survivors, it's certainly a little bit easier for us if we have sooner contact so we can preserve and use, certain types of mechanisms, even if it's like, okay, well, we're going to file a civil protection order and use the subpoena power of civil court to preserve video footage and all, but we're just not getting survivors into STAR soon enough to be able to do some of that. But I think that if there's like a form or an assessment, I think the big thing is the controlled calls. I mean, a survivor themselves could technically do that. It sucks that they have to, because that's that is something that is a little overwhelming. But yeah, I think another thing that survivors do because they want to forget sometimes about what happened is they'll erase their text messages where somebody apologizes for things getting out of hand because they just don't want to see it anymore. They want to delete the contact, and that is also something helpful. So it's just having a conversation with a survivor, and I think utilizing even just connecting them with people like at Star, but also training somebody to kind of, I hate to say like common sense, but just tell me, like, just have a conversation with them about what happened and be like, okay, well, it may be a while. Please don't erase your text messages. Don't do this. But I haven't actually seen this in other jurisdictions.
Yeah, that was going to be, I guess, now the second part of my question is there a checklist where somebody, particularly at the beginning of intake, is there text messages involved? Is there video, as Lauren discussed today? That needs to be preserved. Is there physical evidence? Is there photographs from throughout the night, whatever it may be? And I guess, obviously trying to standardize it, it needs to be changed from situation to situation. No two cases or people are going to be the same, but at the same time, to kind of have some standard operating procedure might be helpful too.
Yeah, and I couldn't quite hear the first part. I heard you say about the checklist, but I couldn't quite hear what you said. Maybe your answer.
Well, I just, what I was wondering is, as part of the chat, first of all, you need to have obviously some discretion because things change.
Right.
And no two things are going to, or people or situations are going to be alike. But it sounds like what you're talking about is frequently there's video, frequently there are text messages, frequently there's physical. I mean, somebody throws away an article of clothing because they don't want to look at the clothing anymore.
Right.
So, the best practices, I guess, in trying to standardize collection of information. I mean, this seems like almost more important than in other types of crimes. Obviously, you don't want anything to go cold, but it seems like here time is of the essence in particular.
Yeah, and I think that, a recommendation I would have is that even if you could sort of have like get a system in place that was like a on-call type 24/7 person who would be doing these checklists with survivors, that yes, it may have been downgraded because the person is not in, it is maybe a case where a survivor was abused as a child, now they're adult and they want to report, but still doing a preliminary assessment, because the other thing that picture or that scenario doesn't paint is that there's usually a reason a survivor is reporting all of a sudden abuse that happened as a child, and it's typically because they found out that perpetrator has ongoing access to another child. And to me, that is still an emergency. And so, yes, the person is reporting abuse and they no longer have contact with that person, but what are we missing in terms of other ongoing emergencies that don't fit very neatly within the crime that's being reported in that scenario?
Thank you very much.
Can I say something?
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
I just wanted to say that when I first reported, the detective told me that she should get DNA results back within 3 to 4 months, within 3 to 4 weeks. And it has now been since mid-January, that I've even gotten any form of contact from the police department. So being able to set reasonable expectations, so I'm not sitting and waiting for months and months and months for a kid that is not going to come back anytime soon, that would have been really helpful, as well as just any level of basic communication, I think would be really helpful to victims.
I mean, we talk about this all the time with issues that are quality of life for people, when it's fixing your street and expectations not being met, but you're 110%, more than 100%, 110% right, that communication and managing expectations is so important, and particularly when it involves somebody personally, that there just needs to be a higher degree of care. And even if the check-in is, and look, nothing ever runs perfectly, nobody is perfect, but even a check-in saying, we know we told you in January, it's going to be March. I mean, it helps you manage what's going on. And right now, we're almost in September and you're no further along than you were in January.
That reminds me of another scenario an advocate recently told me, where a survivor had been trying to connect to find out what happened to a sexual assault that she reported in 2018. And when she finally made contact with a sergeant or something, they're like, well, we can't find any report. And so luckily the advocate actually had the item number from when the initial report was made in 2018. And I don't know why or what the issue was, but the advocate and the survivor were told it got lost because of the hacking scenario that happened.
Yeah, the cyber attack.
And from there, it's like she was then told, well, now it's too late because the prescriptive period has run. There's a couple of problems I have with that. The first is, okay, so how many people didn't, some people don't want to keep calling and saying, where is this? I don't know if we didn't connect with them, then I don't know if they're going to have an item number to help you look for this initial report. The other thing about the prescriptive period issue is that, to me, that's a determination that should be left to the prosecutors once that happens later down the road. That's about prosecution. Investigating and doing a report through law enforcement, what you end up finding is there are other people out there. It's usually not a one-time thing. And then also just kind of looking at our laws and getting a little bit of information about that sexual assault. We have, when it's first degree and second degree rape, there is no prescriptive period for that. And obviously, if it happened in 2018, so there's, if it's a third degree rape, you still have 6 years. So the math didn't add up to me. And obviously, I don't have all the information. Sometimes when you're in an experience with trauma, maybe somebody gave information to suggest it's something else. But, sexual battery would be 4 years. And that's still based on when it was reported would be prescribing in the next couple of months, still not now. And so I don't understand, there's certain things that survivors are being told that it's like, well, nobody wants to question the police. And, it's a hard thing to pose, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think, and I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but if things don't move correctly, you're kind of being victimized twice, right? It's the victimization that happened originally, and then secondly, as things stall. So we get it. All right. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for flying down here and sharing. Thank you, Councilmember.
Councilmember Green.
Lauren, I'd like to thank you for your courage, and sorry that the system has failed you in many respects. You mentioned at least 3 agencies that the state, the hospital, the NOPD that were unable to not only solve your problem, but in some respects failed you. And I'm just sorry for that. I do have one question, but I just want to say that I'm part of a group of people that formed an organization called Voices of the Victims of Crime. And for example, we have a meeting on the 14th of September. I'm not really promoting that meeting as much to say as part of the reason that we did so is that just in general, the system seems to forget about the victims. We focus so much attention on programs that exist to help, those who are incarcerated, if you will, or who are involved with the perpetration of certain crimes. But I just want to say that as a system, we need to focus more attention on those who really suffer, who are the first sufferers relative to criminal activity, and that's the victims of crime. But I know it takes a lot of courage for you, and you certainly invested in coming here. We can't say it enough. I know it's been said, but also thank you. In addition to the fact that we appreciate your courage, thank you for your courage and for your advocacy for others through your testimony. It's appreciated. In line with that, with the ever increasing numbers relative to crime, and therefore crime leads to more victims who are the ones that we should be concerned about most. I ask you this in relative to STAR, why would there have been a decrease in your funding at this time when we have increases in crime, increases in numbers of victims, and also a realization that there are limits relative to law enforcement? If it's a product of the Victims of Crime Act, point directly to the source. Was it a state issue relative to not having the monies available, or what source might that have been? And I know that obviously that could help you. As a council, we've been looking at other agencies, looking at and asking them to tell us what they need. I know that you're not an agency of the city, but I'm just saying for something along these lines, we can help. But why would there have been a decrease?
So through the Victims of Crime Act, everyone received cuts, and it had something to do with decrease in prosecutions on the federal level, because that's where those funds are generated, and then they're sent to the state, and then it goes through LCLE and then to these crime districts, and then slowly by slowly everyone kind of gets a cut, an administrative cut, and then it goes down to victim services. I'm confident in saying that everyone in New Orleans through the Voca Orleans received a cut. I think Star received probably the largest cut of any of the entities. I don't honestly know why. I don't know why, but as far as that particular grant program, you can see where people will advocate for fix the Voca cut. I certainly believe that, Congressman Troy Carter would probably be an ally for us in helping with that. He has always voted in line with our, Violence Against Women Act grants as well as the Voca grants, but it's not in terms of that there are certain pieces in terms of that grant you all are not really going to have much control over.
Right. I hope that you're able to get the funding that restored, maybe directly through Congressman Carter's office or maybe through one of the U.S. senators if it came from the feds. But also, I hope that you will ask as necessary on a state and local level for assistance with such an important role that you play in our city and helping victims of crime. Talk to me about the controlled calls. The limits to that are based on the numbers of parties that have to consent. Is that a state law? Or just maybe I should just ask a question. What would be needed to make controlled calls more usable?
Probably just time of officers to explore that. It's a tool that's used almost always in sexual assaults where the perpetrator is known to the survivor, because and obviously depending on the survivor's comfort and circumstances, they may or may not want to make a call to their perpetrator, but certainly there really is no limits. You just record the phone call, and if they are able to get the perpetrator to admit to certain things, that's useful. Now, sometimes they don't admit to everything, but there's as long as one person on the call, which is usually the survivor, is consenting to the call, it's perfectly legal.
Is that something where an officer would have to listen in because they have special training, or could that be done by a civilian? Or for example, someone within your office, if a position like that were funded?
Certainly anybody can do it. A survivor can do it on their own. I think it helps to have sort of the way BRPD used to use it is it's something they could get anywhere, like off Amazon, and you hook it up to your iPhone and it somehow records the call, because you don't want them to know you're recording the call, because then they're not going to admit to certain things. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how much training, because anybody who practices law, especially in family court, everyone knows about recording conversations because of the nature of that. It's literally anybody can do it.
Maybe it's, I guess, something that needs to be encouraged. It seems like it's a good idea. I mean, to have more done, but if it's as simple as, I can't imagine that it's as simple as the victim being able to call and record and then it gets used. You're going to get the defense attorneys pretty busy on something like that, but go ahead.
I was going to say, I think just a victim's not thinking in a moment that they're trying to get away from the perpetrator. So you really need somebody with a law enforcement or investigative background to present the idea and to kind of facilitate the call, because survivors, their instinct is not going to be to actually do this on their own typically, because unless it is somebody who's like maybe a spouse or something. But most survivors, their instinct is not to call. And in fact, sometimes their instinct is to go down to civil district court and file a protection order to have them not call. And so, the whole process is incredibly overwhelming for survivors. Because on the one hand, they may want to do that to not get calls, but then on the other hand, there's this investigative strategy or tool you could potentially use to get somebody to admit to certain conduct before they know you're going to be reporting them. And I think that's also a key indicator. A controlled call is not going to be used in all cases, because if somebody already knows they're under investigation, they're not going to admit to anything. So it's going to be in those cases where typically a survivor may have been incapacitated. They don't exactly know what happened. We see those used a lot for third degree type rape situations.
Do you feel that you have as good a relationship in terms of communications with officers who are detectives who investigate, or is there something else that could be done?
Our advocates had long-standing great relationships with the sex crimes detectives. I think right now with turnover, and they can try to call, but they have millions of cases. I mean, it's just a capacity issue of getting in touch with people. And then they're kind of told, well, no updates. But it's at that point where it's like, well, how do we see the triage? How do we see where somebody's case is? Because obviously there are going to be different cases depending on the situation that take priority, especially if it's like a serial rapist or where it appears to be an ongoing threat and danger to the community at large. But I think there's this never ending cycle of anxiety for survivors and like not knowing when they'll get a call. And so even if it's, even if there are no updates, I'm going to call you at a minimum in 3 months. That helps survivors to at least go on. But if they don't know anything, they're always living in a state of anxiety. And so, I think that it would be nice if it was unprompted, if survivors didn't have to reach out and say, what is the update? And, if there was just somebody designated as I'm going to be giving, I'm going to go through all the caseloads, because sometimes I wonder if detectives even know what's on their caseload.
Well, if you tell me there's been turnover, they probably don't,
I don't think they do, which
Right.
how are we tracking which ones are about to prescribe? Because not all of the cases are rape. There are also, other types of sexual assault cases. And if they are, there needs to be a queue, that can easily be seen and some sort of tracking to where if there is somebody leaving or there is turnover, anybody can answer the phone for a survivor and say, well, this is where I see where your case is. I don't know if there's like a unified database or anything like that.
That could be an example, I guess, of where a civilian or an administrator could be responsible for that, including the follow-ups, not to give any excuses to the officers who are in the business of or see it every day, but it could be an opportunity for an administrator to make sure that there was going to be follow-up. So it's just food for thought. It's just a question. But again, Lauren, thank you for your courage and for being here today. And thank you for your work, and look forward to working with you more.
Thank you.
Councilmember King.
Thank you, Councilmember. Lauren, I want to say thank you for your courage, and I do apologize. Sorry for the twice being victimized. But again, thank you for being a voice for others who may feel voiceless. And Morgan, thank you for the work that you do with STAR, and thank you to all of the STAR, to the staff. It's a thankless job. Not a thankless job. I want to make sure that I say thank you for the work that you all do. As a father of three daughters, this is a very eye-opening experience, presentation for me. So again, thank you.
All right, seeing no more comments from the dais, we do a public comment. First up, Rochelle Thomas, representing NOPD Sex Crimes Unit. Come on up, Ms. Thomas.
Good afternoon. How
Good afternoon.
you doing? Lauren, apologies for all that you have gone through and for the miscommunication, the mishaps that you have experienced through the New Orleans Police Department. Council, I'm just here just to do a little clarification that NOPD do have civilians embedded in the sex crimes and domestic violence unit. We work very closely with STAR and very closely with the New Orleans Police Department. We are short-staffed, and we are so grateful that you all are considering and looking forward to adding to the unit. But we have social workers that actually do a lot of the follow-up with our survivors. And again, Lauren, we're going to get back to that. I'm definitely going to check in to see what happened with contacting you as well. But just wanted the council to know that we do have social workers embedded, working directly with our detectives and working closely with the detectives in this special victims unit.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Green.
Just as a follow-up then to what I said, will the additional workers be able to help with the backlog in terms of communicating with victims, or is there a process or procedure that is built in relative to contact?
Of course, we can use additional support. Right now, I was one of the first. We started in 2015 as a result of the consent decree. We had only 3 at that time. We increased to 6. We're back down to 3 social workers that they're here with me as well. So of course, we can use more social workers. I know the department are working hard to try to bring on social workers to do the follow-up, to make sure we're keeping engaged and staying engaged with the survivors and keeping the survivors linked and connected to that investigative process. But again, we only have 3.
Yep. So go ahead, Councilmember Green. I have a follow-up.
Could you talk about the caseload, I guess?
I can't talk about the case. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we are 3 social workers that are serving detectives that are in sex crimes, domestic violence, and sexual assault units. So our hands are full as well in trying to make sure our survivors are receiving that follow-up and those callbacks.
Would you define it as a caseload that you have? I guess I almost want to ask, what is the average caseload per social worker or the person who is in your department?
So the average caseload of a social worker, if our social workers now, because we're short, but let me do it if we had all 6, probably will be about 5 detectives. So you will multiply 5 or 6 detectives caseload times that. Maybe anybody want to, let's see. I don't know what the detectives caseloads are. And I don't want to throw numbers out and then be accountable for numbers, but I can say that we may have 5 to 6 detectives that we're working closely with. And whatever their caseload might be, that's our caseload.
That was just an attempt to actually, we're always asking because we want you to tell us what you need. And I know obviously, man, throughout the city, the vacancies are taking a toll on us, departments. But if you had told me it was hundreds per detective or something like that, and then I would next ask you, well, how many detectives does it take to get that caseload down to a manageable point? It seems like the numbers are somewhat.
The numbers are extremely high, and I'm sure the ranking officers of the department, I'm sure that they have those numbers and can definitely, and have gotten those numbers to the council board. But I just wanted to just give the council some insight that we do have some civilians that are housed inside the unit and that are making these callbacks. And prior to the pandemic, we were going on the scene. We are one of the first police departments that are actually going on the scene with our detectives, trying to make that immediate contact, because we do understand trauma. We understand how important it is and how time really is not on your side with trauma.
Yep.
The quicker you get to the survivor, the quicker we get the survivor linked to our resources, our partners, the better the outcome would be for hopefully for the survivors. Do we need help? Of course. I just shared, we have 3 right now. We are in the process of trying to hire some more, but absolutely.
Ms. Thomas, look, the social workers, no doubt about it, and really valuable work that they are doing. Critical work. I agree with you. I wish we had more social workers, not just for sex crimes victims, but for all victims of violent crime in our city. But let me ask you this, how many police investigative specialists are working within sex crimes? Because I know that the review by the health department called for an addition of 16 police investigative specialists.
I can't speak to that, but they are hiring and they have hired some and they are trying to reach that 16 count to get those police investigators, specialist
Now, those are
investigators.
not police, but they're
To get
police
those-
investigators. I just want to make sure everybody.
Yeah, they're not
they're
police
civilians,
officers.
right.
They are civilians. They are not, they are civilians investigators that are coming on to help the department respond to more cases and get to these calls quicker.
Yep.
Yeah, so I know that you all are in constant communication with them regarding that.
I'm not sure about constant communication regarding that, but I have heard from the chief that you know that they will be working on trying to hire these spots that the health department in their review of how sex crimes are responded to in the sex crimes unit, saying that that is really critical, that we need 16 of those specific investigators to work with sex crimes, child abuse cases, which is already an approved civilian position within NOPD. So that right there is just really pushing out there and getting people hired. I'm going to take a page out of Council Member Green's book. I want to talk about this is a great position. This is a great job. It pays between $47,000 and $55,000 annually. So that is the pay for this particular job. It is posted in the governmentjobs.com website for the City of New Orleans job portal, if anybody is interested in applying. And I'm going to tell my team to also add this to one of my social media posts to try to get the word out there as much as possible. And hopefully we can get these positions filled as quickly as possible.
Absolutely, and the department is working hard to get that done. And of course, I just wanted to let you guys know the team is here, the social work team is here, and we are working.
Well, thank you
hard
to the
to
social work.
reach out
We
to our-
appreciate you very much in the work that you do.
Thank you very much.
Next up is Brandy Giles Hernandez with the New Orleans Family Justice Center.
Good afternoon, council. First, I'd like to thank Lauren for sharing her story and having the courage to come here and share her story. I want to thank Morgan for all the work that you do at STAR. First and foremost, as Rochelle has stated, we are working with the NOPD, collaborating to do a 24-hour response to help with survivors in this situation. We also offering a response team to this issue to address this. I mean, this is a matter that's been going on for a while we're dealing with multiple survivors and we're dealing with poly-victimization. So we do have to address that. We're meeting people where they are as a whole person. And with poly-victimization and dealing with somebody with multiple traumas, that's starting from childhood, teen, and adult. And we are seeing the aftermath of dealing with that. We are going to be continue to work with and support NOPD and coming to the table to work collaboratively to support survivors as they go through this process. Also, this pilot program the initiative that we've already been working with the city on does reach out to victims in ways to support them with being able to obtain police reports and providing additional support services to them. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Misty Fry, also with the New Orleans Family Justice Center.
Good afternoon,
good
Council.
afternoon.
Lauren, thank you for sharing your story with us. Thank you for providing the report, Ms. Morgan. My name is Misty Fry. I'm with the New Orleans Family Justice Center, and we're a one-stop agency. We provide services to victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, stalking, and just to iterate what my coworker said, we are together at the table with all of our partners. We are collaborating with New Orleans Police Department to come up with a plan. We currently have a pilot program that we're working with New Orleans, I'm sorry, y'all, New Orleans Police District, 3rd District, and it's to provide that additional advocacy. So basically, we are advocating and we're providing that support by reaching out to survivors after they have made their report to the police department. So that it's not just weeks in between times before they hear from an advocacy agency. So I'm a little nervous. caught me off guard. But so we're together at the table and we're talking and we're coming up with plans on how this cannot continue to go on. We want to be able to be survivor centered and be that first response to make sure that the survivors are receiving the services that they are entitled to and that we are there to provide.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Any more comments? Do you have anything else? No? Okay. All right. Seeing no more comments from the dais. Do you have any public comment? Go
We
ahead,
have one
Anita.
public comment.
Sure. Go ahead.
This is from Lisa Tenenbaum. She says policing is a majority male profession with the current nationwide initiative to have 30% of policing be women by year 2030. By its own demographic data, the NOPD has more than twice as many male officers as female officers with the number of 858 to 404. I don't know a woman alive who has ever felt comfortable or respected when explaining her sexual assault trauma to a man wearing a badge and a gun. This also goes for the marginalized communities that find themselves victims of sexual violence, as that's who experiences these harms. So you want the most vulnerable people in your community to trust an officer to do the right thing with zero evidence they are capable of that. I don't understand why the city council insists on throwing good money after bad and bolstering policing when they have proven over and over again that they don't actually care about or want to protect the citizens of the city. And this has only become a story, something you care to investigate when their callousness also applied to their own colleagues. If they don't care about their colleagues, how can I possibly expect them to care about anyone else? And if I can draw that simple conclusion, so is the rest of your constituency. They are harming police community trust, giving us more reasons not to ever go to them for assistance, making their own case for why funding should move to just about any other source. Given this abysmal record and breakdown in community trust, why are you not looking at alternatives to policing? Why are trained professionals with a background in working with victims of sexual violence and then leaving the investigative work to your police department, though I have little faith in their abilities there as well? Why are resources not going into our communities to teach about consent and respect, and instead continuing to rely on a failed system of crime and punishment, which almost never results in any sort of justice for the victim? You need to do better. Our resources need to go to better. You need to stop bringing the NOPD before you as if scolding them has any effect, so they can mumble about how they're trying and it's just so hard and no one respects them while they fail again and again to do the very basics of their job. If any of you were this terrible at doing the job you were paid to do, we'd vote you out and you'd no longer have it. If I was so negligent at my duties, I would also be without a job. I am unsure why, other than the very demographics I cited above, the NOPD is allowed to provide no service to this community and not only be championed, but bolstered by the elected officials. I say this as the only non-police officer in my immediate family who is therefore intimately aware of the culture and system of which I speak. There are 1,000 alternatives out there, and I implore the city council to look at implementing any of them and to spend actual money to bring them to fruition instead of begging police to provide the bare minimum and then being surprised that they once again fail.
Madam Chair, may I just
you.
take a minute
Sure.
to just thank the members of the New Orleans Police Department, those representatives who are here today. We certainly know that there are a lot of challenges in our city. The biggest reason that there's so many challenges in our city is that there are too many people doing wrong things. But it's hard to respond to all of them. But I certainly would hope that, that there'll be communication with Lauren today and that, we will, help her as much as we can. But I do take issue sometimes with what I hear because the public hears it. And as someone who's been victimized by crime, someone who's asked the members of the police department to let me know about certain things, when I read about them, I have an opportunity, I go to community meetings, that the glass is more than half full in terms of our police department providing the services to our citizens that they need. We have reports all the time because they're important for us to keep up with them. But very honestly, where would we be if we didn't have the New Orleans Police Department responding to the thousands of calls that come in on a regular basis? And for those members of our department, especially from what I witnessed on that day when I went to the 5th District, 5 officers. Now criminals tonight, there are 35. So don't think that that's going to be the case all the time. but it's a very difficult job to respond to, and I thank them for their work. And I thank the council for recognizing through our analysis and through having persons come before us that the victims of the crimes or the reasons that we have police, I wish that we didn't have to have them or judges or the like, but we have to have them. And I encourage us to continue to recognize the importance of victims, but also at the same time recognizing that there are successes out there, especially amongst the NOPD, who put themselves on the line every night to make sure, every day to make sure that we're safer in our city than we would be if they weren't here. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Green. Thank you, Morgan, appreciate you. Thank you, Lauren, for being before us today. Appreciate that. Okay, so now that I was left chairing the meeting, but I'm not even on this committee. So I'm actually gonna have Councilmember Druso go through the appointments, if that's okay. Since
Yes,
you're
let's
actually,
go through appointments. Yes,
if-
I am
if you're
actually
on the committee.
Yes. All right. I don't know if I'll do them as fast as the chair, but I'll be quick. All right, the first point.
Councilmember, I'm
Yes.
sorry to interrupt.
Yes,
In
please.
case you do go as fast as Councilmember Morel, we do have one appointment. I mean, excuse me, one comment for this agenda item.
Okay, is it, what specific appointment, Ms. Curran?
This is for number H, Neil Abramson.
All right, we'll wait till we get to Mr. Abramson. All right, so, Nathan, do you want to just walk us through each one to make sure everything's been received correctly, and then we'll move in second from there? Oh, okay. How about, all right, can we do this? Can I confirm with you to facilitate this, given this late hour, that everybody's motion has been properly received and the questionnaire has been properly completed? Yes, all right, well then, that will make things a little bit faster. Can we get a motion, please, on moved by Councilmember Harris? I seconded, although Councilmember King was fast there. 3-0, Mr. Odom carries. Next item is B, Robin Birchfield for the Crisis Intervention Strategy Task Force. Moved by Councilmember Harris, seconded by Councilmember King. 3 yeas, no nays. That carries. Next item C, I'll move for approval, Stephen Bergeron for Food Corray Commission. 3 yeas, no nays. That carries unanimously. D is Tony DiMaggio for Food Corray Commission. Moved by Councilmember King, seconded by Councilmember Harris. 3 yeas, no nays. That carries. Next item, E, Robert Pearson. Moved by Councilmember King, seconded by Councilmember Harris. 3 yeas, no nays. That item carries. F, Gabriel Verdure for Food Corray Commission. Moved by Councilmember Harris, seconded by Councilmember King. 3 yeas, no nays. That item carries. Next item on the agenda is appointing school board member Catherine Baudouin to NORD. Moved by Councilmember King, seconded by Councilmember Harris. All right, Anita, before we move and second the next item, will you please read the public comment?
The comment is from Mandy Potemkin. We need to stop allowing right-wing cronies of the mayor like Neil Abramson to be appointed to these important boards. Giving them special parking spots and other perks may be good politics for her, but another failure for the people of New Orleans. We need honest people that share our values to serve. What about regular folk? Where is our representation? And that's it.
Thank you. All right, it's been properly moved and seconded. 3 yeas, no nays. The penultimate item, Nomita Joshi Gupta, I apologize if I butchered your name. City Planning Commission, moved and seconded. 3 yeas, no nays. And then the final one, Joseph Wheeler for appointment to Municipal Yacht Harbor, moved, seconded appropriately. 3 yeas, 4 yeas, no nays. And anybody want to stay here longer, or should we move to adjourn? All right, I will move to adjourn. seconded by Councilmember Harris. 4 yeas, no nays, and we stand at adjournment. Thank you.
All right, in the next meeting, we've got to reorganize a little bit here, so let's give us a couple minutes to do so. It's the Sewage and Water Board, Billing Ordinance Advisory Committee, with the membership of Councilmember Morrell, Councilmember Druso, Councilmember Thomas, Senator Harris, Representative Hilferty, Renee Gonzalez, and Gray Lewis. So if everyone can start making your way up to the dais, if I called your name.